Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. Almost 30 years have passed, and I still question what I saw that day in '93. I'm not some attention seeker or conspiracy nut. Before that day, I was just a regular guy from Salem who enjoyed hunting and worked cleaning aquariums for a living. Nothing special, but what happened in those woods near Grants Pass changed everything for me. It was early November, crisp and clear. The kind of fall day that makes the Oregon woods feel magical. I'd been deer hunting in the foothills since dawn, moving quietly through the underbrush. By mid-afternoon, I hadn't had any luck, so I decided to take a break on an old stump in a small clear-cut area. The sun was filtering through the trees, warming my face while I ate a sandwich and drank some coffee from my thermos. The woods were peaceful, just the occasional bird call and the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. I remember feeling completely relaxed, just enjoying being out there. My rifle was propped against the stump beside me, and I was mentally plotting where I'd head next when something caught my eye at the edge of the old growth forest, about 100 feet away. At first I thought it was just a bear. We get plenty of those around here. But as I focused, I realized what I was seeing was walking on 2 legs. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Standing there, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees, was what I can only describe as a Sasquatch, a female Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I'd have called them crazy or assumed they were drunk. But I was stone-cold sober, and what I saw was real. She was massive. I'd estimate around 7 feet tall. Her body was covered in dark brown, almost black hair that hung about 3 to 4 inches long across most of her body. The hair moved slightly in the breeze. What struck me immediately were her breasts, large and pendulous, covered in the same hair but unmistakably female. Her face was flatter than a human's, with a pronounced brow ridge, but her eyes looked almost human. They were dark, alert, and intelligent. Around her eyes and a small spot just above her breastbone, the hair was thinner or absent altogether. But she wasn't alone. That's what makes this whole thing even more incredible. Behind her, half hidden by her massive frame, was a smaller figure, maybe 4 feet tall, a juvenile. It was moving around more playfully, seeming to pick at things on the ground, then looking up at the adult as if seeking approval. The younger one's hair was slightly lighter in color, and its movements were more energetic, almost childlike. I remember thinking I should grab my rifle, not to shoot, but just to look through the scope for a better view. But I couldn't move. It was like my body was frozen in place while my mind raced. I've never felt anything like that mixture of awe, disbelief, and, I don't know, a strange sense of privilege, I guess. Like I was witnessing something incredibly rare. For what must have been about 10 seconds, they didn't notice me. I just sat there, barely breathing, watching them move along the tree line. The adult was deliberate in her movements, powerful but careful. I'd guess she weighed somewhere between 450 to 525 pounds, but she moved with surprising grace. The way she navigated through the underbrush showed an intimate knowledge of the forest. Then everything changed. The adult suddenly stopped and turned her head directly toward me. Our eyes met across that clearing, and I felt something I can't fully explain. A connection, a moment of mutual recognition between 2 intelligent beings. There was no aggression in her gaze, just awareness and perhaps concern. She made a quick gesture with her hand, not quite pointing, more like a sweeping motion toward the smaller one. She didn't make any vocal sound that I could hear, but the juvenile immediately responded, moving closer to her. They turned away from me, and crossed the rest of the clearing at a slightly quicker pace, not quite running, but definitely hurrying. Within moments, they disappeared into the thick forest on the other side. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled coffee all over myself when I tried to take a drink. I didn't even feel it. I was raised in a religious household that rejected evolution. We were taught that stories about missing links and ancient human ancestors were just scientific mumbo-jumbo. But what I saw that day didn't fit into any category I had in my mind. It wasn't human, but it wasn't just an animal either. It moved with purpose and intelligence. That simple gesture to protect the young one, it was so parental, so familiar. When I finally got up to leave, my legs were wobbly. I remember looking down at my rifle and feeling grateful that I hadn't even thought about raising it. The idea of harming what I'd seen felt deeply wrong, like it would have been something close to murder. I didn't tell many people at first, just my hunting buddy, Mike, who I trusted not to laugh in my face, and my wife. Mike listened carefully and just said, "Damn, Kev, I believe you saw something, man." My wife was supportive but concerned about how shaken up I was. For months after I had trouble sleeping, I'd close my eyes and see those intelligent eyes looking back at me. It took me almost a year before I contacted anyone officially. I finally reached out to Peter Burns' Bigfoot research project after reading about their work in a newspaper article. I was nervous about being ridiculed, but Peter took my account seriously. He told me that sightings of females with young were extremely rare. Most reports were of solitary, presumably male individuals. That made what I saw even more significant. After that day, everything changed for me. I started reading everything I could get my hands on about primates, human evolution, and of course, Sasquatch sightings. I'm not formally educated, never went to college, but I became what you might call a self-taught student of anthropology. I spent more time in the woods, but differently than before. Less hunting, more observing. I never went out without a video camera again, always hoping for another glimpse, another chance to document what I'd seen. I know skeptics would say I saw a bear standing up, or that my mind played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. The proportions were all wrong for a bear, the length of the arms, the way the knees bent, the flat face with those expressive eyes, and the interaction between the two of them. That wasn't animal behavior as we typically understand it. There was communication there, protection, teaching. Something that still haunts me is wondering how many of them are out there. If they're breeding and raising young, there must be a viable population. How have they remained so hidden? How smart must they be to avoid detection in an increasingly developed world? Sometimes I wonder if she recognized me as a threat, specifically because I was carrying a rifle. That level of understanding would be remarkable. I've gone back to that same area dozens of times over the years, but I've never seen them again. Sometimes I find things that make me wonder. Unusual breaks in branches that seem too high for a person. Odd arrangements of sticks that don't look natural. Large footprints that get washed away by rain before I can document them properly. But never another clear sighting. Some people who've heard my story ask if I regret not taking a shot. Not to kill, but just to have proof. I don't, not for a second. Whatever I saw out there deserves respect. It's not a trophy or a scientific specimen. It's a living, thinking being trying to raise its young and survive. The strangest part is how that brief encounter made me question everything I thought I knew. If these creatures exist, what else might be out there that we've dismissed as myth or legend? How much don't we know about our own world? I'm 61 now, and I still clean aquariums for a living. Most days are ordinary. I go to work, come home, watch TV with my wife, and live a normal life. But there's not a week that goes by that I don't think about what I saw. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I'll stop and just listen, hoping to hear something, some sign that they're still out there. I don't expect everyone to believe my story. I probably wouldn't if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what I saw that day wasn't a bear, wasn't a man in a suit, and wasn't my imagination. It was something that shouldn't exist according to conventional wisdom. But it does. And that knowledge has both expanded my world and made it more mysterious. The most frustrating part is that I have absolutely nothing to prove it happened. No photos, no hair samples, no footprint casts. Just my memory, which gets hazier each year. Sometimes I worry that as I get older, I'll start to doubt myself. That's partly why I'm sharing this now. What I experienced that day in the woods near Grants Pass wasn't just a sighting of something unusual. It was a moment where my understanding of the world cracked open and something new and unexplainable poured in. I can describe what I saw in physical terms, the height, the hair, the movements, but I can't fully explain the feeling of making eye contact with something that exists in the shadows between what we know and what we don't. I still go out to the woods sometimes, camera in hand, hoping. My wife thinks I'm a little obsessed, and maybe I am. But wouldn't you be? If you had seen something that changed everything you thought you knew about the world, wouldn't you want to see it again? Wouldn't you want to understand? All I know for certain is that for about 10 seconds, on an ordinary autumn day in 1993, I saw something extraordinary, and nothing has been quite the same since. Story 2. I still can't explain what happened that day. I've been hunting for over 30 years now, and nothing like this has ever happened before or since. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This happened last November during deer season near the Lake of the Ozarks by Climax Springs. My son Tyler and I had been planning this hunting trip for months. He's 19 now, been hunting with me since he was 12, and we always look forward to our time together in the woods. We know these woods pretty well, been hunting this same area for years. We got to our spot before sunrise around 5:30 a.m. The air was crisp, maybe 40 degrees, and there was this light fog hanging between the trees. Perfect hunting weather. We separated to our stands, as we usually do. Tyler took the one near the clearing about 200 yards west of mine. We've always hunted close enough to hear each other's shots, but far enough apart to cover more ground. I settled into my stand and watched the woods come alive as the sun started rising. You know how it is, that peaceful feeling when the forest wakes up. Birds started chirping, squirrels rustling around in the fallen leaves. I saw a few does early on, but nothing I wanted to take. Around 9:30 a.m., something changed. I can't really explain it well, but the woods just felt different. The birds went silent. The squirrels disappeared. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. I've been in the woods enough to know when something's not right. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got this feeling like I was being watched. I scanned the trees around me, but didn't see anything unusual. Still, that feeling wouldn't go away. You know when your instincts are screaming at you, but you can't figure out why. It was like that. I actually considered calling Tyler on the radio to see if he was feeling it too, but I didn't want to spook any deer that might be nearby. Then I heard Tyler's rifle crack in the distance. One clean shot. That's my boy. He's become a damn good hunter over the years. I figured he'd got himself a deer, so I waited about 15 minutes to give him time to get down from his stand before I radioed him. "You get something?" I asked. His voice came back shaky. "Mom, can you come over here?" Something in his tone made my stomach drop. Tyler's not the type to get rattled easily. I climbed down from my stand and started making my way toward him, trying not to rush and make too much noise. The whole time, that uneasy feeling just got stronger. When I reached Tyler's stand, he was still up in it, looking down at me with this pale face I barely recognized. His knuckles were white from gripping his rifle. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Did you hit something?" He nodded but didn't move to climb down. "I shot a buck. Big one, 10-pointer at least." "Well, that's great," I said, confused by his reaction. "Where is it?" He swallowed hard. "It's gone." I frowned. "What do you mean, gone?" Tyler finally climbed down, moving like an old man instead of a teenager. When he reached the ground, he kept looking nervously around the woods. "I shot it right over there." He pointed to a spot about 40 yards away. "Clean shot right behind the shoulder. It walked maybe 10 feet and then collapsed. I was about to radio you when I heard something." "What kind of something?" I don't know how to describe it. Like a deep breath or a snort, but not like any deer or bear I've ever heard." He was speaking quietly, almost whispering. I looked over and there was this figure standing near my deer. My first thought was another hunter, maybe someone trespassing on the land. "A person?" Tyler shook his head. "No, not a person." He paused, looking embarrassed. It was tall, really tall. Its head was above those cedar trees over there. I looked where he was pointing. Those cedars were easily 8 feet tall. "I got scared," he continued. "Really scared. I don't know why, but every instinct told me not to look at it directly. So I looked away, hoping it wouldn't notice me up in the stand. When I looked back a few seconds later, my deer was gone. Just gone." I'll admit, my first thought was that Tyler was messing with me, or that he'd missed his shot and was making up a story. But Tyler's not like that, and the fear in his eyes was too real. "Show me where you shot it," I said. Tyler led me to the spot, walking cautiously like he was afraid of what we might find. Sure enough, there was blood on the ground. A lot of it. A spray pattern like you'd expect from a lung shot. This was no graze wound. The deer had definitely been hit hard. "See? I hit it good," Tyler said, his voice still shaky. "It should have dropped right here." I nodded. The blood trail was unmistakable. "Let's track it." We followed the blood, which wasn't difficult. There was so much of it that I was surprised the deer had managed to go anywhere. The trail led into a thicker part of the woods, away from the clearing. Tyler stayed right behind me, practically stepping on my heels. About 60 yards from where Tyler had shot it, we found something that made my heart skip a beat. A deer leg, just the leg, lying on the ground. It wasn't cut clean like you'd do with a knife when field dressing. It looked torn off. The joint was ripped apart, with tissue and tendons hanging from the end. I've been hunting my whole life and never seen anything like it. "What could do that?" Tyler whispered. I didn't have an answer. "Let's keep following the blood." We tracked another 30 yards or so and found part of another leg. Same deal. Looked like it had been violently wrenched from the body. The blood trail continued, but something was wrong. There were no drag marks on the ground, which would be expected if a predator was pulling the carcass. Just blood droplets, like the deer was still moving, or being carried. By this point my skin was crawling. The woods remained unnaturally quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just us and this bizarre blood trail. We followed it another 100 yards before it finally stopped at the edge of a small ravine. The blood just ended. No deer carcass, no more parts, nothing. Just a final splash of blood on some leaves and then nothing. I stood there, baffled. Tyler was right behind me, breathing fast. "Where's the rest of it?" he asked. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of what happened to that deer. There should have been drag marks if a predator had taken it. There should have been more blood if it somehow kept moving. There should have been something. "Tyler," I said carefully, "tell me exactly what you saw." He took a deep breath. "I shot the buck. It walked a few steps and fell. I was about to call you when I heard that sound. I looked over and saw something standing by my deer. It was tall, way taller than a person. Skinny but big, if that makes sense. Its head was above those cedar trees." "Did you see its face?" I asked. Tyler shook his head. "No. Like I said, I looked away. Something told me not to stare at it. When I looked back, both it and my deer were gone. And you didn't hear anything? No sounds of it dragging the deer away? Nothing. It was just gone. We stood there for a long moment, both of us trying to make sense of what happened. I've been in these woods my whole life. I know every predator that lives here. Nothing, not a bear, not a mountain lion, not a pack of coyotes, could carry off a full-grown buck without leaving any sign. And certainly nothing that could tear off limbs like that. We spent another hour searching the area, widening our circle, looking for any trace of the deer or whatever took it. We found nothing. Eventually, I made the decision to head back to the truck. Neither of us said much on the walk back. What was there to say? As we were loading our gear, Tyler finally broke the silence. "Mum, what do you think it was?" I wish I had an answer for him. I've replayed that day in my mind over and over, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe there was another hunter who somehow took the deer without us noticing, but that doesn't explain the torn-off limbs or the lack of drag marks. Maybe it was a bear, but bears don't stand that tall, and they don't make deer carcasses vanish without a trace. We haven't been back to that spot since. Tyler's been reluctant to go hunting at all, though he won't admit that's why. Sometimes I catch him looking over his shoulder when we're outside at dusk, like he's checking to make sure nothing tall is standing behind him. I've been hunting these woods for over 3 decades. I've seen bears, coyotes, bobcats, you name it. I know the natural predators around here and what they're capable of. Whatever took that deer wasn't natural. I don't believe in monsters or supernatural things, but I can't explain what happened that day. All I know is something was in those woods with us, something strong enough to tear apart and carry off a 200-pound buck without leaving tracks, something tall enough to look over 8-foot trees. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I wonder if it's still out there. Story 3. I still don't know what the hell was in my hunting tent that day, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. This happened back in 2004, when I was getting ready for deer season near Pollock Pines. I've been hunting those woods in El Dorado County for over 20 years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. I live in Folsom, about an hour away from my hunting spot. It's this perfect little clearing where 2 game trails intersect. Prime location for bagging a nice buck. That area always had good deer movement, so about 4 weeks before the season opened, I drove out there to set up my blind. The tent was nothing fancy, just a standard 3-man hunting tent with camouflage pattern that I'd used for a few seasons. Good waterproof material, sturdy zippers, the works. Cost me about $200 at Cabela's. I staked it down real good, made sure it was hidden from the trails, but had good sight lines, and left some of my gear inside, just basic stuff like a folding chair, some scent eliminator, and a few other items. Nothing valuable that would tempt someone to break in. When I drove back up there the weekend before opening day to finish setting up, I knew something was wrong the second I approached the clearing. I mean, you get a feeling sometimes, right? The birds weren't singing. The woods just felt off. As I got closer to my tent, I noticed the entrance flap was hanging loose. At first, I thought maybe a storm had ripped some stakes out, but when I got about 20 feet away, the smell hit me. Jesus Christ, that smell. I've smelled a lot of nasty things in my life. Roadkill in summer heat, skunk spray up close, even a bloated deer carcass that had been sitting in a creek for days. This was different. It wasn't just rotting or musky, it was both and something else entirely. Sharp, almost chemical, but organic at the same time. Like ammonia mixed with wet dog and something else I can't even describe. It burned my nose. I pulled my shirt up over my face and approached the tent. The main zipper was completely torn open from top to bottom. Not cut, torn. The heavy-duty waterproof material had been ripped like it was tissue paper. Whatever did this had serious strength. My first thought was bears. We get black bears in that area, and they're known to break into camps looking for food. but I hadn't left any food in the tent. I know better than that, and bears usually tear things apart looking for food. They don't just open a zipper and go inside. I stood there for a minute, not wanting to look inside, but knowing I had to. When I finally worked up the nerve to bend down and peek through the torn entrance, I nearly gagged. The smell was 10 times worse inside. My folding chair was knocked over, and the floor of the tent was covered in hair, not just a little bit, but clumps of it, like something had been shedding all over the place. What made it even creepier were the fleas. They were jumping everywhere, hundreds of them. As soon as I disturbed the tent, they started hopping around like crazy. I've never seen a flea infestation that bad, not even when my buddy's dog got them. I didn't want to go inside, but I needed to see what kind of damage there was. I pulled on a pair of work gloves from my truck and covered my face with a bandana. The second I crawled into the tent, the fleas started jumping on my pants. The interior was a mess. Whatever had been in there had clearly been sleeping there. There was a depression in the middle of the floor where something heavy had been lying. I noticed right away that nothing was actually destroyed inside except for the zipper. This wasn't vandalism. It wasn't teenagers or some asshole messing with my stuff. Whatever did this just wanted shelter, a place to sleep. That thought freaked me out even more than thinking it was just looking for food. The hair was what really got to me. It was coarse and thick, ranging from about 2 to 4 inches long, with a weird reddish-brown color I hadn't seen before on any animal in these woods. Not deer, not bear, not coyote, nothing I recognized, and there was so much of it. I've field-dressed hundreds of deer in my life, and I know what animal hair looks like. This was different. I grabbed a Ziploc bag from my pack and collected some of the hair samples. I'm not sure why I did that, just seemed like something I should do. I didn't touch anything else, just backed out of the tent, stripped off my outer layer of clothes and left them there because of the fleas, and drove straight home. When I got back to Folsom, I still couldn't shake the image of that torn tent and all that hair. My neighbor Tom is a chemist at UC Davis, and his son Jake was in vet school at the time. I figured if anyone could identify mystery animal hair, it would be them. I brought the samples over that evening. Tom took one whiff of the bag and his face scrunched up. "What the hell is that?" he asked. I explained what had happened, and he seemed genuinely interested. He said he'd take a look at the hair under his microscope and ask Jake to check it out too. 3 days later, Tom knocked on my door. He looked confused, which isn't an expression you often see on a scientist's face. "You're not punking me, are you?" he asked. I told him no and asked what he found. "Well, that's just it," he said. "We can't figure it out." Jake and I both looked at it. It's definitely mammalian hair, but it doesn't match any species we could identify. It's not bear, not mountain lion, not coyote, not wolf, not domestic dog. The structure is all wrong. He showed me some photos he'd taken through the microscope, pointing out the medulla pattern and cortex structure. It meant nothing to me, but he explained that different species have distinctive hair structures. This one didn't match anything in their reference materials. Could it be a bear with some kind of skin condition? I asked. That was the only explanation I could think of. A diseased animal that had abnormal hair growth. Tom shook his head. Not likely. The structure is too consistent. This is normal hair for whatever animal it came from. It's just not from any animal we can identify. That's when the real uneasiness set in. What the hell had been sleeping in my tent? Something strong enough to tear through heavy-duty nylon, something unfamiliar to a vet student and a scientist, something that left behind hundreds of fleas and an odor so strong it made my eyes water. I decided to go back the next day with my buddy Mike. Safety in numbers, right? Plus, I needed to either salvage the tent or tear it down. I couldn't just leave it there. When we arrived, the tent was exactly as I'd left it. The smell was still strong, but had dissipated somewhat in the open air. Mike's reaction was the same as mine, immediate disgust at the smell, followed by confusion about the hair. "Maybe it's a wolverine," he suggested, but we both knew wolverines weren't native to this area, plus a wolverine wouldn't be that big. We decided to tear the tent down. No way was I using it again after that. The smell had permeated the fabric so deeply that I knew it would never come out. As we were folding it up, Mike pointed to something I hadn't noticed before. Claw marks on the ground inside where the tent floor had been. Not normal claw marks like a bear or mountain lion would leave, but long, straight furrows in the dirt, almost like someone had dragged a garden rake across the ground. We finished packing everything up, and I tossed the tent in the back of my truck. My hunting gear, the chair, some rope, and other items that had been in the tent, all reeked of that smell. Strangely, when I got home and washed everything with soap and water, the smell came right out. It didn't cling to the fabric of my chair or my clothes like skunk spray would, but the tent itself. That smell never came out. I eventually threw it away. I went back to that spot for the 2004 hunting season anyway. I'm not one to scare easily, and I wasn't about to give up my prime hunting location, but I didn't sleep there. No way in hell. I drove back to Folsom each night after hunting and returned at dawn. During that season, I never saw anything unusual in those woods. No strange animals, no unexplained noises, but every time I went to that clearing, I felt watched. The hair on the back of my neck would stand up for no reason. Sometimes I'd hear movement in the brush that didn't sound like a deer, too deliberate, too heavy, but whenever I'd look, nothing would be there. The weirdest part? The deer seemed to avoid that specific area that season. In previous years, I'd see multiple bucks using those game trails. That year, almost nothing. It was like they knew something was wrong. I've told this story to a few other hunters over the years. Most of them suggest mundane explanations. A bear with mange, a mountain lion with some kind of disease, even a homeless person with a dog. But none of those explanations account for the hair that couldn't be identified, or the incredible strength it would take to tear through that tent material. One old-timer suggested it might have been a Bigfoot, but I've never bought into those stories. Besides, from what I've heard, Bigfoot is supposed to be tall and thin, not something that would curl up in a tent. Whatever it was real, it was big, and it was something I'd never encountered before in over 2 decades of hunting those woods. I still hunt in El Dorado County, but I never went back to that specific spot. Some instinct tells me to stay away, and after all these years in the woods, I've learned to trust my instincts. The hair samples? Tom kept them for a while, then eventually sent them to a colleague at another university for analysis. I never heard anything back. When I asked him about it months later, he just shrugged and said his colleague had no answers either. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking about what could have been sleeping in my tent, something unidentified, something powerful, something that left no tracks except for those strange claw marks. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still smell that odor, that sharp, musky, alien smell that doesn't belong to any animal I know. I've been hunting most of my life, and I've seen a lot of strange things in the woods, but nothing compares to this. Nothing has ever made me question what I know about the wildlife in these parts, like finding my tent torn open and filled with unidentifiable hair. Whatever it was, I just hope I never run into it face to face. Because something tells me if I do, I won't be around to tell another story. Story 4. I still can't bring myself to talk about what I saw that day. It's been 3 months and I've barely told a soul. My granddaughter convinced me to write it down, saying it might help clear my head. I'm not so sure, but at 94 years old, I don't have many stories left to tell, and this one needs telling. I've spent my entire life in these Arkansas mountains, born and raised in Franklin County, been hunting, trapping, and tracking since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. My daddy taught me to read animal signs before I could read books. I've tracked everything from squirrels to black bears, spent more nights under the stars than most folks spend in hotels. These woods are like an old book I've read 1,000 times, familiar, worn, and full of stories. That Thursday in October started like any other. I woke up before dawn, had my coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise off the mountains. My joints ached, something fierce. Weather was changing. I decided to head into town for supplies, nothing special, just needed some deer attractant for the upcoming season and to pick up my prescription from the pharmacy in Ozarks. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon when I started heading back home. The sun was already getting low, casting long shadows across Mail Creek Road as I drove between Combs and Summit. This stretch of road is remote, cuts right through the Ozark National Forest. Dense timber on both sides, barely wide enough for two vehicles. I've driven it thousands of times over the years. I was thinking about the weather, about how the leaves were turning earlier than usual this year, wondering if it meant we'd have a hard winter ahead. My old Chevy pickup hummed along, the heater working overtime against the autumn chill. The radio was playing softly, some country station with more static than music this far out. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought someone was walking on the road up ahead, maybe a half-mile out. Just a dark figure that looked like a person in heavy clothes. Nothing unusual about folks walking these back roads. But something didn't sit right. The way it moved, it was off somehow. I eased off the gas a bit, squinting through my windshield. My eyesight ain't what it used to be, but I can still spot a deer at 300 yards. As I got closer, maybe 200 yards away, the figure stepped right onto the road and stopped dead in its tracks. It turned toward my truck, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. That wasn't a person. Time seemed to slow down. The figure stood there, stock still, staring at my approaching vehicle. I've hunted these woods for nearly 90 years. I know every animal that calls these mountains home, know their tracks, their habits, their movements. This was something I'd never seen before, yet somehow always known existed. I eased off the gas even more, my truck crawling forward. I was maybe 150 yards away now, and I could make out the details. It was tall, taller than me for sure, and I'm 6'2", broad across the shoulders, barrel-chested like an old prize fighter. But the lower body looked wrong, too skinny, almost emaciated. Long arms hanging down past the knees, and it was covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but long, dark grey hair that hung in matted clumps all over its body. The face, God help me, the face was almost human, but twisted somehow. The forehead bulged out, covered with lighter grey hair, almost white in places. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I've faced down black bears, survived a mountain lion encounter in '76, even got caught in a flash flood back in the '60s. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever made me feel the fear I felt in that moment. It just stood there, staring at me with eyes I couldn't quite see, but could feel boring into me. I was maybe 100 yards away now, my truck barely moving. That's when it moved. The thing bolted across the road faster than anything that size had a right to move. 1 second it was standing there. The next, it was a grey blur crossing the pavement in 2 massive strides. It disappeared into the timber on the mountainside, crashing through the underbrush like a wounded bull. I sat there, in my idling truck, right in the middle of the empty road for maybe 5 minutes. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give out right then and there. My hands were shaking something fierce. Part of me wanted to back up, turn around, and never come down this road again. Another part, the tracker that's lived in these woods his whole life, wanted to cut the engine, grab my rifle from the rack, and follow those tracks into the woods. In the end, I did neither. I just sat there until my breathing slowed, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Then I put the truck in gear and drove to the spot where it had crossed. I pulled over, grabbed the flashlight from my glove box, and stepped out. The sun was even lower now, the forest getting dark. I limped to where I'd seen it cross, my bad hip complaining with every step. There in the gravel shoulder were tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were footprints all right, but massive, easily 16 inches long. They looked almost human, but wider, with 5 distinct toes. The stride length was incredible, nearly twice what a man my size could manage, and they were deep, sunk into the gravel like whatever made them weighed hundreds of pounds. I followed the tracks to where they entered the woods. The underbrush was smashed down, small saplings broken off. Something big had come through here, and recently. I shined my flashlight into the trees but could see nothing beyond the first few yards of disturbed vegetation. Standing there, I noticed something else caught on a broken branch. A tuft of hair, grey, coarse hair, about 6 inches long. I reached out and touched it. It wasn't like deer or bear fur, different texture altogether, almost like human hair but thicker. I don't know what possessed me, but I took that hair, pulled out my handkerchief and carefully wrapped it up, tucked it in my shirt pocket. Evidence, I suppose, though I wasn't sure I wanted to show it to anyone. As I stood there, I realized something else about what I'd seen. The creature had looked old. Not just the white-grey hair on its head, but the way it moved. For all its speed, there had been a stiffness to it, like an old man trying to run. And it was thin. Too thin around the legs and arms, like it wasn't eating right. It looked sick or dying. I got back in my truck and drove home, my mind racing the whole way. I've heard the stories all my life, tales old-timers told around campfires about the wild man of the mountains or the Arkansas booger, stories I'd always dismissed as tall tales, meant to scare children away from wandering too far into the woods. But I've spent my life reading sign, tracking game. I know what I saw wasn't a bear standing up, wasn't a man in a costume, wasn't any known animal that's supposed to be in these mountains. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, that tuft of hair on the table in front of me. I poured myself a finger of whiskey, something I rarely do these days, and tried to decide what to do. In the end, I decided to keep it to myself, at least for a while. Who'd believe a 94-year-old man claiming to see a Sasquatch? They'd say my eyes were going, that my mind was slipping. Maybe they'd be right to think so. I'm not a fool. I know how it sounds. But the next morning, I couldn't help myself. I drove back to that same spot on Mail Creek Road. The tracks were still there, though less distinct after a night of heavy dew. I walked into the woods a ways, following the path of broken vegetation. About 50 yards in, I found where it had stopped. There was a depression in the pine needles and leaves, like something large had sat down to rest. From there, the trail went cold. Either it had been more careful from that point on, or I'd lost my touch after all these years. I spent 2 hours searching before my hip pain forced me back to the truck. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. I never saw the creature again. But twice I found tracks in soft areas near the creek. Once I found what looked like a crude shelter, just pine boughs pulled together to make a lean-to against a rock outcropping. Could have been made by a human, I suppose, but it was in a spot so remote no hiker would bother going there. As November turned colder, I found less and less sign. The last tracks I found were smaller, not as deep, like whatever made them had lost more weight. They were also more erratic, like it was struggling to walk straight. Then nothing. For 2 weeks, no tracks, no broken branches, no tufts of hair. The timber went quiet in a way I can't explain. Even the deer and squirrels seemed to avoid that section of forest. I started having dreams about it. Not nightmares exactly, but strange dreams where I would see the creature from a distance, watching me. In these dreams, I could see its eyes, deep-set, dark, but undeniably intelligent. And sad, somehow, like it knew something terrible. It's been over a month now since I found any sign. Part of me wonders if it moved on to another area, following some ancient migration pattern. But another part, the part that spent a lifetime in these mountains, thinks it went somewhere quiet to die. I've still got that tuft of hair sealed in a plastic bag in my dresser drawer. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, wondering if I should give it to someone who might know what to do with it, a university or a wildlife department. But then I think about what might happen if people believed me. Scientists, reporters, thrill seekers, tramping through the woods, disturbing whatever's out there. So I keep quiet, for the most part. Told my granddaughter when she pressed me about what was bothering me. She believes me, I think, though she's never said so directly, just listens to my ramblings with patient eyes. I think about that creature almost every day. About how it looked so old and unwell, about how it moved with such incredible speed despite its condition, about those eyes that seemed to look right through me, assessing whether I was a threat. Was it the last of its kind? Some ancient being that's roamed these mountains since before white men came? Or is it part of a hidden population that's managed to stay just out of sight all these years? I don't know. I still drive that stretch of Mail Creek Road regularly, still scan the tree line, hoping for another glimpse, still wonder if I imagined the whole thing, despite the evidence in my drawer that says otherwise. All I know for certain is this. There are things in these mountains that defy explanation, things that have been here longer than us and may well be here after we're gone, things that watch us from the shadows, careful never to be seen, and sometimes, very rarely, when they're desperate or dying, they let themselves be glimpsed. Not by accident, I think, but as a reminder. A reminder that we don't know everything. That mystery still exists in this world of satellites and smartphones. I won't be alive much longer. These old bones are wearing out, same as that creature's seemed to be. But I wanted someone to know what I saw. To know that there are still wonders in these old mountains if you've got eyes to see them. I never did figure out if it was male or female, never got close enough to tell, and honestly, I wouldn't know what to look for anyway. It was just a being, ancient, wild, and in trouble. Whatever it was, I hope it found peace, and I hope it wasn't the last of its kind. Story 5. I've been debating for weeks whether to post this. Part of me still thinks people will just laugh it off or tell me I was seeing things. But I know what I saw, and my sister saw it too. So I'm finally getting this off my chest. This happened back in October when I was 16. My parents had just bought this old farmhouse in South Courtright, New York, way up in the Catskills. The house was built in 1880 and sat on about 7 acres of land. My dad got it for a steal because it needed work, but he's always been good with his hands. Mum fell in love with the property immediately. All those trees, the mountain views, the peace and quiet. I wasn't thrilled about moving away from my friends, but I had to admit the place had character. We'd only been living there for about a month when it happened. The house sat pretty isolated, with the nearest neighbor about half a mile down the road. Behind us was nothing but woods that eventually led up into the mountains. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it was different. The darkness out there isn't like city darkness. It's complete. No streetlights, no glow from nearby houses, just pitch black beyond our windows. That night, my parents had gone into the living room to watch TV after dinner. My sister, Emma, she was 14 and I were still hungry, so we made some sandwiches and sat at the kitchen table. It was around 8:30 p.m., totally dark outside. The kitchen had these big windows that looked out toward the backyard and the woods beyond. I remember we were just talking about school stuff. Emma was complaining about her math teacher, and I was only half listening because I was scrolling through my phone. Then I felt this weird sensation, like when someone's watching you. I can't explain it, but something made me look up toward the window. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was a face looking in at us through the window. Not a human face. It was massive. The kitchen window was about 4 feet wide, and this thing's head took up most of it. Its face was incredibly broad, with no real neck visible, just this huge head that seemed to connect directly to enormous shoulders that extended beyond the window frame. The thing that struck me most was its color. It wasn't dark brown or black like you'd expect from bears around here, or the Sasquatch stories you hear. This thing had bright orange hair, not red-orange, like a person with red hair, but a true vivid orange, almost like an orangutan, but deeper. The hair was shaggy and thick, covering most of its features, but I could clearly see its eyes reflecting the kitchen light, dark and expressionless, just observing us. It had this heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, and its nose was flat and wide. Its mouth was just a line, not showing any emotion or teeth, just staring, watching us eat. Here's the thing that still freaks me out when I think about it. Our kitchen window is pretty high up. I'm 5'10", and when I stand outside, the bottom of that window is at eye level for me. Whatever was looking in at us had to be enormous to be peering in like that, easily over 9 feet tall. For what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds, I just stared back at it, completely frozen. My sandwich was halfway to my mouth, and I couldn't move. Then my brain finally caught up, and I yelled, "What the fuck is that?" Emma turned around and saw it too. She screamed so loud it hurt my ears. The thing didn't flinch or react at all to our screaming. It just kept staring with those empty eyes. We both started yelling for our parents. I heard them running from the living room, and my dad shouting, "What's wrong?" As soon as their footsteps hit the kitchen tile, the face disappeared from the window. My dad reached us first, and we were both pointing at the window, trying to explain through our panic what we'd just seen. My mom thought we were messing around at first. We used to prank each other a lot, but she could tell from our faces that we were genuinely terrified. "There was something looking in at us," Emma kept saying. "It was huge." My dad, being the practical guy he is, immediately grabbed his flashlight from the drawer and said he was going outside to look. My mum tried to stop him, but he insisted it was probably just a bear or something. I remember saying, "Dad, bears aren't orange," but he was already heading for the back door. My mom stayed with us in the kitchen, all of us huddled together, staring at that window like the face might reappear any second. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even text my friends about what was happening. After what felt like forever, my dad came back in. He had taken the big mag light and walked the entire perimeter of the house. He said he couldn't find any tracks because the ground was too hard. We hadn't had rain in weeks. He didn't see anything moving in the woods either. "Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" he kept asking us. "Could it have been a reflection or something?" But Emma and I were positive. We described it exactly the same way. The orange hair, the massive size, the expressionless face, the way it just watched us. When we mentioned how huge it was, my dad went back outside with a tape measure. He measured from the ground to the window. It was almost exactly 9 feet. Whatever we saw had to be at least that tall to look in so easily. That realization changed my dad's attitude. He went from skeptical to concerned really quick. He checked all our doors and windows twice that night, and for the first time since we'd moved in, he got his hunting rifle out of the safe and kept it nearby. None of us slept well that night. I kept waking up thinking I heard something moving outside my window. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Emma ended up sleeping in my parents' room. The next morning, my dad and I went out to check the area in daylight. The ground around the house was mostly packed dirt and patchy grass, and like he'd said, it was too hard to show footprints. But we found something else that made my stomach drop. About 20 feet from the kitchen window, at the edge where our yard met the woods, several branches on a tall bush were broken. Not like an animal had pushed through, but like something very large had either moved past them or deliberately snapped them. The breaks were fresh, the wood still green and wet inside. Dad said it could have been a deer or something, but the breaks were at least 7 feet off the ground, too high for any deer. For the next few days, I refused to be alone in the kitchen after dark. Emma wouldn't go anywhere in the house by herself. My parents tried to be rational about it, saying it was probably just a bear standing on its hind legs, But they knew that didn't explain the orange color or the clearly ape-like face we'd described. About 2 weeks later, my dad came home with a copy of the local newspaper. There was a small article about a farmer about 5 miles from us who reported something breaking into his henhouse and stealing chickens. The farmer claimed he'd seen a big, hairy, orange-colored creature running off with several of his birds. The paper treated it as a joke, with a headline like, "Catskill chicken thief, Bigfoot gets hungry too." But my blood went cold when my dad showed it to me. Someone else had seen it, the same orange color. We weren't crazy. After that, my dad installed motion sensor lights all around the property. He started locking up his chickens more securely in the coop he'd built. For a while, we were all on edge, waiting for it to come back. The weird thing is, we never saw it again. Not directly, anyway. But there were incidents. Once, all the motion lights went off at 3 a.m., and by the time my dad got to the window, they were off again. Nothing on our cheap security camera, just a blur before it went out. Another time, something tipped over our entire trash can and scattered garbage everywhere, but it wasn't like raccoons or bears would do. Items were placed in almost neat piles, separated by type. Food in one pile, plastics in another. That really freaked us out. I've searched online for reports of orange Sasquatch sightings, and there are a few scattered across the country, but nothing concrete. Most Bigfoot reports describe brown or black hair. The orange color makes me wonder if it's something else entirely, something people haven't properly documented. The part that still haunts me is its eyes. They weren't angry or threatening. It wasn't baring teeth or acting aggressive. It was just watching us, studying us maybe. Like we were the curiosity, not it. Sometimes I wonder if it had been watching us for days before we noticed it, learning our routines. My parents still live in that house. I'm away at college now, and I don't visit as often as I should. When I do go home, I never sit with my back to that kitchen window after dark. Some nights when I'm there, I'll wake up thinking I heard heavy footsteps outside, but I never look. I don't think I want to know if it's still out there. The farmer who saw it stealing chickens moved away the following spring, sold his place at a loss, from what I heard. Never gave a reason publicly, but my dad ran into him at the hardware store before he left, and all he would say was, "Some things aren't worth living with." I don't know what it was we saw that night. I don't know if it was dangerous or just curious. But I know it was real, and I know it was intelligent. The way it vanished so quickly when my parents approached, how it never left evidence besides those broken branches. It knew what it was doing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else in these mountains has seen it. If they're like me, too afraid of being called crazy to talk about it. I wonder if it's still out there, watching other families through their windows while they eat dinner, unaware they're being observed. All I know for sure is that the woods behind my parents' house aren't empty. And whatever lives there, with its orange fur and expressionless face, knows we're here too. Story 6. I still don't know how to explain what happened that night. It's been over 40 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The feeling of its fur between my fingers, those red eyes, that growl. Sometimes I still wake up hearing it. This all went down in November 1981. I was 12 years old, and my little sister Roxanne was 9. We lived on a small farm in St. Clair County, Michigan with our mom. Dad had left a few years earlier, so it was just us 3 looking after the place. We had some chickens, a couple goats, and a vegetable garden that kept us fed through most of the year. Things started getting weird around September that year. Our neighbor, Mr. Haskell, found his barn door completely ripped off its hinges one morning. Not just broken, completely torn off. The metal hinges were bent like someone had twisted them with pliers. Mr. Haskell was a tough old guy who never seemed scared of anything, but I remember seeing his hands shaking when he was showing my mom what happened. After that, strange things started happening around our property too. We'd find fences torn down, not cut or broken, but like something had just pushed right through them without caring. The posts would be snapped like twigs. We had these huge grain barrels for the animals that weighed a ton when they were full, and we'd find them tipped over and completely emptied overnight. Our dogs would go crazy some nights, barking like mad and running toward the darkness at the edge of our property, but they'd never go past a certain point. They'd just stand there, hackles raised, barking at something we couldn't see. Our goats started acting strange too, jumpy and nervous all the time. Sometimes they'd refuse to go into the barn at night, and we'd have to practically drag them in. Roxanne started getting scared of the barn. She said she could hear something moving around in there at night, something big. I told her it was just the wind, or maybe raccoons, but honestly, I was starting to get freaked out too. The noises didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was like a heavy, deliberate movement, not the scurrying you'd expect from small critters. Mom tried to keep things normal, but I could tell she was worried. She started making sure all the doors and windows were locked before bed, which she'd never bothered with before. Our farm was pretty isolated. You had to drive about 10 minutes down a dirt road just to reach our nearest neighbor. By November, things had escalated. One morning we found huge, strange footprints in the mud near the barn. They were shaped kind of like a human foot, but way bigger, at least 15 inches long, and deep like whatever made them was really heavy. Mom took some photos and measurements, but when she called the sheriff's department, they just laughed it off and said it was probably a bear, even though bears aren't exactly common in our area. The night it happened was unusually cold for November. There was this weird silence hanging over everything. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. My sister and I had finished our homework after dinner, and Mom asked us to go check on the goats before bed. Make sure they had water and that the barn door was secure. Roxanne didn't want to go. She was practically in tears, saying she heard something in there the night before, something breathing. I remember trying to act brave for her sake, telling her it was nothing, that I'd protect her. God, I wish I'd listened to her. Mum said we both had to go, that we couldn't just ignore our chores because we were scared. She gave us a flashlight and told us to be quick about it. I remember her watching us from the kitchen window as we walked across the yard toward the barn. The moonlight made everything look strange and washed out. The barn was about 50 yards from our house. It wasn't very big, just enough space for our goats, some hay storage, and Mom's gardening equipment. As we got closer, Roxanne started dragging her feet. She was whispering that she didn't want to go in, that something bad was in there. I told her to stop being a baby, but my heart was racing too. When we reached the barn door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, which was weird because Mum always made sure it was latched. I pushed it open and immediately felt something was wrong. It was too quiet. Usually the goats would make noise when they heard someone coming, but there was nothing. "I'll go first," I told Roxanne, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Wait here with the flashlight." I stepped inside, and the familiar smell of hay and animals was there, but there was something else too. A musty, wild smell I'd never encountered before. Like wet dog, but stronger and more, I don't know, primal somehow. The air felt heavy and warm, despite the cold night outside. The light switch was just inside the door, on the right wall. I reached for it, feeling my way along the rough wooden planks. My gloved hand touched something soft and furry, and for a split second, I thought it was one of the goats, but it didn't move away like a goat would. It stayed completely still. Confused, I pulled my glove off and reached out again, wanting to feel what it was with my bare fingers. The moment my skin touched it, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't the coarse, short fur of our goats. This was longer, thicker, almost like human hair, but more dense, and it was warm, not just warm, but hot, like there was a furnace beneath it. I froze, my fingers still touching whatever this was, my mind racing to make sense of it. That's when I heard the growl. Not from across the barn, from directly in front of me, from whatever I was touching, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. In the same moment, Roxanne shined the flashlight past me, illuminating what I was touching. What I saw in that beam of light will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was tall, so tall it had to hunch over to fit in our barn, at least 7 feet, maybe more, covered in thick black fur from head to toe. But its face, God, its face. It wasn't exactly like a human's, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen either. The features were flattened with a broad nose and a heavy brow. But the eyes, they're what I remember most clearly, red and bloodshot, reflecting the flashlight beam like a deer's eyes on the highway, but with an intelligence behind them that no animal should have. And I was touching it. My bare hand was pressed against its side. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The creature and I just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it blinked, slowly, deliberately, and I found my voice. "Roxanne," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the creature. "Run back to the house, now." To her credit, my little sister didn't ask questions. I heard her feet scrambling away, running back toward the safety of our home. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot. The creature and I were still locked in that stare, and somehow I knew that if I turned to run, it would be on me in an instant. So I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. My hand was still pressed against its fur. I was too terrified to move it away. Up close, I could smell its breath, a sour, meaty smell that made my stomach turn. I could hear its breathing, heavy and rhythmic. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it seemed as unsure about what to do as I was. After what seemed like forever, it moved. Not toward me, but away. It straightened up as much as the barn ceiling would allow and took a step back. Then another. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful despite its size. It never took its eyes off me. When it reached the back door of the barn, a door we rarely used that led out toward the woods, it pushed it open with one massive hand. The hinges creaked in the silence. Then, still watching me, it ducked through the doorway and walked away into the darkness of the trees beyond our property. I stood there, unable to move, for I don't know how long. Eventually, I heard shouting, Mum's voice, calling my name, footsteps running toward the barn. The beam of a more powerful flashlight sweeping across the floor. Mum burst in, wild-eyed, with Roxanne behind her. She grabbed me, checking me for injuries, asking what happened if I was hurt. All I could do was point toward the back door, still hanging open. "It went that way," I managed to say. "Mum called the sheriff's department that night. 2 deputies came out, looked around the barn with flashlights, took some notes. But I could tell from their faces they didn't believe us. One of them suggested what I'd felt was probably a raccoon that had gotten in. Mum lost it at that point, shouting that if it was a raccoon, it was a 7-foot-tall raccoon walking on 2 legs. They left promising to file a report, but nothing ever came of it. A reporter from the Detroit News did come out a few days later. I guess Mum had called them too, desperate for someone to take us seriously. The article they published was small, buried in the back pages. It mentioned our encounter, but framed it as a curiosity, not a serious report. They did note, almost as an afterthought, that despite having the opportunity to harm me, the Sasquatch had merely growled and walked away. After that night, we never saw the creature again. The strange incidents stopped too. No more torn fences or emptied grain barrels. But we all knew what we'd seen, what I'd touched. We moved away from that farm the following year. Mum said it was because she'd found a better job in town, but I knew the real reason. None of us could sleep properly there anymore. Every noise in the night had us sitting bolt upright in bed. Every shadow outside the window could have been it coming back. I'm 54 years old now, with kids of my own. I've never told them about what happened. How do you explain something like that? But sometimes, when we're camping and the woods go quiet at night, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for those red eyes, and I can still feel the sensation of that fur beneath my fingertips as real today as it was 40 years ago. I don't know what it was. A Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, some animal science hasn't classified yet. I can't say. All I know is what I experienced. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if somewhere in the woods of Michigan it remembers me too. And do you see Tursen Story 7? Stay tuned. I still haven't told many people about what happened to me back in 2003. When I do, they usually just laugh it off or tell me I was seeing things. Maybe I was. But I know what I saw that evening near Crescent City, and I still can't explain it. I'd moved from Brooklyn to Northern California earlier that year for work. It was a massive change. Going from crowded streets and constant noise to the relative quiet of Northern California. Don't get me wrong, I loved the change of pace, but sometimes I still felt like a fish out of water, especially when it came to outdoor activities. That October, a few co-workers convinced me to go camping. You can't live in Northern California and not experience the Redwoods, they kept saying. I'd never been much of an outdoorsman back east, but I figured what the hell, might as well embrace the West Coast lifestyle. We drove up to a spot near Crescent City on a Friday afternoon. The drive itself was beautiful, winding roads through massive trees that made me feel tiny. We found a decent campsite a few miles into the forest, far enough from the main road that you couldn't hear any traffic, but not so deep that we'd get lost. Or so I thought. The first day went great. We set up our tents, cracked open some beers, and just enjoyed being away from computers and cell phones. The air was crisp, but not too cold, and the smell of the forest was incredible. Nothing like the occasional whiff of Central Park back home. As evening approached on the second day, we realized we needed more firewood for the night. I volunteered to go look for some. I figured it would be a good chance to explore a bit on my own and prove to myself I wasn't completely useless in the wilderness. "Don't go too far," Mike said. "It gets dark fast under these trees." "I'll stay within shouting distance," I promised, grabbing the small hatchet we'd brought for splitting kindling. It was around 5:30 p.m. when I headed out. The sun hadn't set yet, but the forest was already getting that golden hour glow that filters through the trees. I started gathering fallen branches not far from our campsite, but the really good, dry stuff seemed to be a bit farther out. I'd been wandering for maybe 15 minutes, arms loaded with branches, when I spotted what looked like a large redwood stump about 25 yards away. It was massive, the kind of thing that makes you appreciate how ancient these forests are. I remember thinking it would be a good landmark to help me find my way back. I looked down for a second to adjust the load of branches in my arms. When I looked back up, the stump was gone. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. How does a massive tree stump just disappear? I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw movement where the stump had been. What I saw next still gives me chills when I think about it. Where the stump had been, I now saw what looked like a man walking deeper into the woods. But something was off. The figure was massive, much taller than any person I'd ever seen. It was moving slowly, deliberately, away from me and deeper into the forest. I could only see it for about 10 seconds before it disappeared behind some trees, but I remember the silhouette clearly. It looked like someone in bulky, dark clothing, but the proportions were wrong. The arms seemed too long, the shoulders too wide. Without thinking, I called out, "Hey!" My voice echoed through the trees, but there was no response. At least, not a verbal one. Instead, I heard a whistle. Not like someone whistling a tune, but a single clear note that seemed to hang in the air. It wasn't threatening, just acknowledging. I dropped the wood I was carrying and moved cautiously toward where I'd seen the figure. Something in me needed to confirm what I'd seen, to make sure I wasn't going crazy. As I got closer to where the stump had been, I noticed another actual stump nearby. Standing next to it, I realized it came up to about my chest. and I'm 5'10". Later, when I brought my friends back, we measured it at about 6 feet tall. The figure I'd seen was at least a foot taller than this stump. Whatever I saw had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what I was seeing. The logical part of my brain was saying it must have been another hiker, maybe wearing a backpack that made them look bigger. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The movement wasn't quite human. On impulse, I whistled back, the same single note that I'd heard. A few seconds passed, and then from much farther away, I heard the same whistle again. By then, the sun was starting to set in earnest, and the forest was getting dark quickly. I suddenly remembered all those horror movies where some idiot goes investigating strange noises in the woods and never comes back. That's when the fear hit me. I was alone in a forest I didn't know well, with limited daylight left, and I'd just been communicating with something. I grabbed what wood I could and hurried back toward our campsite, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I finally saw the glow of our campfire through the trees, I nearly cried with relief. "What took you so long?" asked Sarah as I dumped the wood near the fire. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to play it cool. These people were experienced campers, and I didn't want to come across as the scared city boy. "Just got a little turned around," I said, sitting down heavily on a log. "These woods all look the same after a while." We spent the evening cooking hot dogs and making s'mores, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Every time there was a noise from the forest, my head would snap in that direction. The others definitely noticed I was on edge, but they just attributed it to me being new to camping. That night in my tent, I barely slept. Every cracking branch or rustling leaf had me wide awake, straining to hear if that whistle would come again. It didn't, but I still felt like something was out there, watching. The next morning over breakfast, I finally decided to tell them what I'd seen. I expected them to laugh or tell me it was just my imagination, but their reactions surprised me. Mike and Sarah exchanged looks. "How tall did you say it was?" Mike asked. "At least 7 feet, maybe taller," I replied. "And it whistled at you?" Sarah seemed particularly interested in this detail. "Yeah, just a single note." "Why? What are you thinking?" That's when Kevin, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. "Sounds like you might have seen Bigfoot, man." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. None of them were. "I'm serious," Kevin continued. "There have been dozens of sightings in these woods over the years. Tall, dark figure. Some reports mention whistling as a way they communicate." "Come on," I said. "Bigfoot isn't real. It was probably just some really tall hiker." In that exact spot, with no trail, no campsite nearby, and they just happened to be standing completely still until you looked away. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's a stretch." Despite my skepticism, I was curious enough to agree when they suggested we go back to where I'd seen the figure. After breakfast, I led them back to the area, which took longer than expected because everything looked different in daylight. When we finally found the stump I'd used as a reference point, I pointed in the direction I'd seen the figure disappear. "It went that way." Mike looked thoughtful. "That doesn't lead to any trail or campsite. It just goes deeper into the forest." "Let's follow it a bit," Kevin suggested. "See if we can find any signs." We spent the next hour carefully making our way through the forest in the direction I'd indicated. The further we went, the denser the woods became. There were no trails, no signs of human activity, just more trees, more underbrush, more forest. "If it was a hiker, where was he going?" Sarah asked quietly. "There's nothing out here." We eventually reached a small clearing and decided to turn back. As we were about to leave, Kevin called us over to a spot at the edge of the clearing. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the ground. It was a footprint, much larger than any of ours. The impression wasn't clear enough to make out details, but it was definitely bigger than Mike's boot, and he wears a size 12. Could be anything, I said, not wanting to jump to conclusions. A bear, maybe. Bears don't walk on two legs for extended periods, Mike replied. And that doesn't look like a bear print to me. We made our way back to camp, mostly in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we packed up to head home that afternoon, I took one last look at the forest. Part of me wanted to go back out there to try and get another glimpse of whatever I'd seen, but a stronger part knew better. On the drive home, Kevin told me more about Bigfoot sightings in Northern California, particularly around the redwood forests. The descriptions were eerily similar to what I'd seen: tall, dark figure, moving quietly through dense forest where no trails existed. It's been almost 20 years now, and I still think about that day often. I've done research, read accounts from other people who claim to have seen similar things in those woods. Some of their stories match mine so closely it's unsettling. I've never gone back to that specific camping spot. Not out of fear exactly, but out of respect. Whatever I saw that day, whether it was a known creature or something science hasn't classified yet, it wasn't threatening. It could have easily approached our camp if it wanted to, but it kept its distance. That whistle wasn't menacing. If anything, it felt like acknowledgement, maybe even communication. Sometimes when I'm hiking in other forests now, yes, I actually got into hiking after this, I find myself whistling that same single note. I never get a response, but I keep doing it anyway. I still don't know what I saw that October evening. Maybe it was Bigfoot. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know for certain is that for about 10 seconds, I saw something in those woods that I can't explain, something that, by all conventional logic, shouldn't exist. And yet there it was, walking away from me, blending back into the ancient forest it calls home. Story 8. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not the type to make up stories or look for attention, but what happened that day in the forest has been eating at me. I need to get it off my chest, even if nobody believes me. I'm a bow hunter from Northern California, been hunting these woods since I was a kid myself. My dad taught me, his dad taught him, and I'm teaching my little brother Jake, who's 9. This happened back in October during Chanterelle season. If you don't know, chanterelles are these golden mushrooms that restaurants will pay serious money for. We're talking $20, $30 a pound. My family's been harvesting them for generations, and we have a secret spot that produces the best ones I've ever seen. It's about a mile up from Miller Creek, following this old game trail that winds through oak and Douglas fir stands. That Saturday morning, I decided to take Jake with me. My parents were busy with some home renovation project, and Jake had been begging to go mushroom hunting for weeks. The kid's been glued to my hip since he could walk, always wanting to do whatever his big brother does. We got an early start, leaving the house around 7 a.m. while the morning fog was still hanging in the trees. Jake was all pumped up and brought his little portable boombox. You know, one of those cheap ones you can get at Walmart. My parents got it for his birthday, and he's been obsessed with it ever since. Despite me telling him the forest is better without music, he insisted on bringing it, playing his favorite rap songs at a low volume. I didn't push it, figured it might keep him entertained during the hike. We parked at our usual spot off the fire road and started the hike in. The morning was cool, maybe mid-50s, with that typical Northern California fall crispness. The trail starts with a crossing over Miller Creek, just a small hop over some rocks this time of year when the water's low. Then it's about a mile up this winding game trail that gets pretty steep in places. Jake was surprisingly energetic, bouncing ahead of me with his little boombox in one hand, rap music creating this weird contrast against the natural forest sounds. I remember thinking how the music might scare away any deer in the area, which was kind of annoying since I'm always mentally noting potential hunting spots, even when I'm not hunting. We reached our secret Chanterelle patch around 8:30 a.m. It's this perfect little area where oak and Douglas fir trees create this microclimate that chanterelles absolutely love. The ground was still damp from the rain earlier that week. Perfect conditions. I showed Jake how to identify them, those distinctive golden-orange caps with the false gills underneath that run down the stem instead of stopping at it like regular mushrooms. See how they almost look like they're growing out of the ground instead of on it? I explained to Jake, who was actually surprisingly into it. And they smell kind of fruity, like apricots. We started picking, using small folding knives to cut them at the base, rather than pulling them up. I had Jake put them in this old wicker basket we've been using for mushroom hunting for years. The kid was a natural, spotting them even before I could sometimes. We'd been picking for maybe 30 minutes when I got this weird feeling. You know that sensation when you just know you're being watched? It was like that, but intensified. I've spent enough time in the woods to trust my instincts, so I casually looked around, thinking maybe we'd stumbled near a mama bear and her cubs or something. That's when I saw it. Or them, I should say. About 40 yards away, partially hidden behind a large Douglas fir, was what I can only describe as a small, human-like creature covered in reddish-brown hair. At first, I thought it was a bear cub standing on its hind legs, but the proportions were all wrong. Its body shape was distinctly humanoid. It was maybe 5 feet tall at most. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slowly reached for Jake, who was still picking mushrooms while bobbing his head to the music, completely oblivious. "Jake," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't make any sudden movements, but look over by that big fir tree." Jake looked up, following my gaze, and then I heard his breath catch. "What is that?" he whispered back. Before I could answer, a second figure emerged from behind another tree about 10 feet from the first one. This one was slightly smaller, maybe 4.5 feet tall, with the same reddish-brown hair covering its body. They both had these remarkably human-like faces, but with broader noses and deep-set eyes. Here's the thing that still messes with my head. They weren't acting aggressive or even particularly cautious. They were just watching us. Almost like they were curious, like we were the exhibit at the zoo, not them. "Are those monkeys?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think so. I've been hunting these woods my entire life. I know every animal that's supposed to be here, and whatever these were, they weren't in any field guide I'd ever read. What happened next still doesn't make sense to me. Instead of grabbing Jake and getting the hell out of there, which would have been the logical response, we just went back to picking mushrooms. It was like some unspoken agreement passed between us and these creatures. They weren't threatening us, and we weren't threatening them. But they didn't leave. As we moved around the clearing, picking chanterelles, they moved too, always keeping roughly the same distance, ducking behind trees when we looked directly at them, but never really hiding. Sometimes they'd be in plain sight, just standing there watching us with what I can only describe as intense curiosity. Jake's music kept playing, some Drake song, I think, and the creatures seemed particularly interested in that. They would tilt their heads when the beat dropped or when the lyrics got faster. It was surreal. The weird thing was that they made absolutely no sound, not a twig snap, not a footfall, nothing, and there was no smell either. I've encountered bears, deer, mountain lions. They all have distinct smells. These creatures had none that I could detect. This bizarre mushroom picking session continued for about 2 hours. We managed to collect around 1.5 pounds of chanterelles, which is a decent haul. The whole time, our silent observers followed us around the clearing, sometimes hiding, sometimes in plain view. As we were getting ready to head back, I had this strange impulse. I took a handful of the best chanterelles we'd picked and placed them on top of a fallen log near the edge of the clearing. Jake looked at me questioningly. "Just leaving a thank you," I said, not really understanding my own actions, for letting us pick in their woods. Jake nodded, like this made perfect sense, which shows how normalized this bizarre situation had become to us in just a couple hours. We packed up our gear and our mushroom haul and started heading back down the trail. The creatures followed us, still keeping their distance, but definitely tracking our movement. They stayed with us all the way to the creek crossing, but didn't follow us across the water. When I looked back from the other side, they were just standing there watching us leave. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, questioning my own sanity. Jake, on the other hand, slept like a baby and woke up excited to go back the next day. "Do you think our friends will be there again?" he asked at breakfast, like having unknown forest creatures follow you around was the most normal thing in the world. I wasn't sure going back was a good idea, but curiosity got the better of me, so the next morning we headed out again, following the same route. Jake brought his boombox again, playing the same playlist. When we reached our mushroom spot, the first thing I noticed was that the chanterelles I'd left on the log were gone, but that's not what sent chills down my spine. In their place were 3 pine cones, but not just any pine cones. These were perfectly dried and opened wide, with the pine nuts visible inside, arranged in a deliberate triangle pattern. I've been in these woods my entire life, and I've never seen pine cones arranged like that naturally. Someone, or something, had placed them there. "They left us a present," Jake said, his face lighting up with a huge smile. I stood there, unable to move, as the reality of what this meant sank in. These weren't just random animals. These creatures had understood the concept of exchange, of gifts. They had waited until we left, taken the mushrooms, and left something they thought valuable in return. We stayed there for another hour or so, picking more chanterelles, but our friends didn't show themselves that day. The forest felt different, though, like we were still being watched, but from much further away. I've gone back to that spot several times since then, sometimes with Jake, sometimes alone. I've never seen those creatures again, but I always leave a few mushrooms on that same log. Sometimes they're gone when I return, sometimes they're not. Occasionally, there's something left in their place. An unusually shaped rock, a perfectly formed feather, once even a small pile of blackberries that weren't in season anywhere nearby. I've researched extensively since then, and the closest thing I can find to what we saw are descriptions of juvenile Sasquatches, or what some Native American tribes in the area call forest people. I've never believed in that stuff before, but I know what we saw. What haunts me isn't fear. These creatures never once made me feel threatened. What haunts me is the intelligence I saw in their eyes, the curiosity, the understanding. It's made me question everything I thought I knew about these forests I've spent my whole life in. How many times have they watched me without me knowing? How many generations of them have observed my family harvesting chanterelles from our secret spot that was probably theirs long before we came along? I haven't told anyone else about this except my wife, who I think believes me but doesn't want to discuss it much. Jake talks about it sometimes, but he's 9. People just think he has an active imagination. So that's my story. I don't have proof. I didn't take pictures. Honestly, it never even occurred to me in the moment to pull out my phone. All I have are the memories of that day and the occasional pine cone or interesting rock left on a fallen log. That and the unshakable knowledge that there's something intelligent sharing these woods with us, something that likes chanterelle mushrooms and rap music. Story 9. I've been debating whether to share this for almost 30 years now. I'm not someone who seeks attention or who believes in the paranormal. Quite the opposite. I'm a urologist with a practice in North Dallas. Science, evidence, and rational thought are what guide my life and career. But what happened to me in the Arbuckle Mountains back in '93 defies any logical explanation I can muster, and it's haunted me ever since. It was mid-October 1993. I'd been working non-stop for months, barely taking a weekend off. My colleague Mark suggested we take a hunting trip to the Arbuckles in southern Oklahoma. Nothing serious, just a chance to get away from the operating room and clear our heads. I hadn't been hunting in years, but the idea of spending a couple days in nature sounded perfect. We drove up early on a Friday morning. It's only about a 2-hour drive from Dallas to the Arbuckles, but it feels like entering another world. The mountains aren't particularly tall, but they're ancient, some of the oldest exposed rock in the country. There's something primeval about them that's hard to explain unless you've been there. We set up at a small cabin Mark had rented near a place called Dordie in Murray County. It was pretty basic, just a couple of beds, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that had definitely seen better days. But it had a fireplace and was secluded, which was exactly what we wanted. That first day we mostly just hiked around, getting our bearings. Mark had hunted there before and knew the area well. The terrain is rugged, rocky outcroppings, dense cedar thickets, sudden ravines. Not many people venture deep into these hills, which was part of the appeal. The real hunt would start the following morning. We went to bed early, planning to be up before dawn. I remember sleeping poorly that night. There was this constant feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake. I tried to brush it off as just being in an unfamiliar place. We were up by 5 a.m., had a quick breakfast and headed out while it was still dark. Mark suggested we head toward a ridge about a mile east of the cabin where he'd seen deer in the past. The walk was challenging in the dark, even with our flashlights, but we made it to our spot just as the sky was beginning to lighten. It was cold, maybe low 40s, and dead quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. We separated slightly, keeping within sight of each other, but giving ourselves space to hunt. I found a good spot near a large cedar tree with a clear view of a small clearing below me. Perfect place for deer to pass through. The morning wore on without much activity. I saw a few squirrels and some birds, but no deer. Around 10 a.m. I decided to move to a different position. I signaled to Mark, who was about 75 yards to my right, and started making my way along the ridge. That's when it happened. I was walking slowly, scanning the trees ahead, when something caught my eye about 400 yards away. At first I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe the trunk of a fallen tree. But then it moved. I froze, raising my binoculars to get a better look. What I saw still doesn't make sense to me. Behind a massive cedar tree, must have been at least 14 feet tall, something was stepping out. Something big, really big. It was black. Not brown like a bear, but jet black, and tall. I'm a good judge of height, given my profession, and this thing had to be at least 9 feet. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, maybe 3 or 4 feet across. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I knew of. It stepped completely out from behind the tree, and I could see it was standing on 2 legs. The shape was unmistakably humanoid, but absolutely nothing like a human in size. It was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. For a moment, probably only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity, it just stood there. Then it turned its head directly toward us. I couldn't make out facial features at that distance, even with the binoculars, but I knew it was looking right at me. I felt it. It's hard to describe the feeling of being watched by something like that. It wasn't like being spotted by a deer or even a bear. There was intelligence in that gaze. Awareness. I was completely frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't even call out to Mark. The thing just stared, didn't move otherwise, didn't make any noise I could hear, just watched us. Then, with deliberate slowness, it stepped back behind the cedar tree. That movement is what broke my paralysis. I turned to look at Mark, who was standing just as still as I had been, rifle hanging loose in his hands. "Did you see that?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark's face was pale. "It was as big as a goddamn truck," he said. We didn't speak again for several minutes. Both of us were just staring at that cedar tree, waiting to see if the thing would reappear. It didn't. After what seemed like forever, Mark slowly made his way over to me, never taking his eyes off that spot. "We should go," he said quietly. I couldn't have agreed more. We backed away slowly at first, then turned and moved more quickly down the ridge toward the direction of our cabin. Neither of us talked about running, but our pace kept increasing until we were practically jogging. Once back at the cabin, we finally started discussing what we'd seen. Mark kept saying it had to be a bear, but we both knew bears don't stand 9 feet tall on their hind legs, and they certainly don't move the way this thing did, deliberate, controlled. "Sasquatch," I finally said out loud, feeling ridiculous even as I said it. "I'm a medical doctor. I don't believe in cryptids or monsters." But Mark didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly. We decided to pack up and head back to Dallas that afternoon. Neither of us felt comfortable staying another night. The whole drive back we barely spoke. What was there to say? We'd seen something impossible. Once I got home, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, despite the height and posture being all wrong. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion caused by shadows and our own expectations. Maybe, though I hated to even consider it, Mark had played some kind of elaborate prank on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I have 20/15 vision, better than average. I'm trained to observe details and make accurate assessments. It's literally what I do for a living as a surgeon. And what I saw wasn't anything that should exist in those mountains. I couldn't let it go. 2 weeks later, I drove back up to the Arbuckles alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my wife, not Mark, nobody. If I'm honest, I was half hoping I wouldn't find anything, that it really had been some kind of shared hallucination. Finding the exact spot wasn't easy, but I'd taken mental notes of landmarks. It took me most of the morning, but I eventually located what I was certain was the same cedar tree where we'd seen the creature. The tree was even larger up close, easily 14 feet tall with a thick trunk. Standing next to it gave me chills, remembering how the thing had used it as cover. I examined the ground around the tree looking for, I don't know what, footprints, hair, some kind of evidence, but there was nothing obvious. The area around the tree was mostly solid rock with patches of thin soil and leaf litter. Not the kind of surface that would hold tracks well. I spent hours searching the surrounding area and found nothing conclusive. What I did notice, though, was how the terrain dropped off sharply about 50 yards behind the tree. There was a deep ravine there, and at the bottom, partially hidden by brush, I spotted what looked like a cave entrance. It wasn't large, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, but it was definitely there. The Arbuckles are known for their cave systems. Most of them haven't been fully explored. Standing there, looking at that dark opening, I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched again. The hair on my arms stood up, and despite the mild temperature, I felt cold all over. I didn't approach the cave. Something told me that would be a very bad idea. Instead, I took some photos of the area with the disposable camera I'd brought, then made my way back to my car as quickly as I could. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been allowed to leave, that whatever had watched us from behind that tree could have done much worse than just observe. I had the photos developed, but they didn't show much, just the terrain, the cedar tree, and a distant shot of what might be the cave entrance. Nothing conclusive, nothing I could take to anyone as proof. For a while, I considered reporting what I'd seen to someone, park rangers, local authorities, even one of those Bigfoot research groups. But in the end, I didn't. I'm a respected physician in my community. I couldn't risk my reputation on something so outlandish, even if I knew what I saw was real. Mark and I never went hunting again. We still see each other professionally from time to time, but we don't talk about that day. The one time I tried to bring it up about a year after it happened, he just shook his head and changed the subject. I think he's done what most people would do, convinced himself it was a bear or some other explainable animal. I wish I could do the same. It's been almost 3 decades now, and I still think about it regularly. I've read accounts from other people who claim to have seen similar creatures in those mountains. Some of the descriptions match what we saw so closely that it gives me chills. A watcher, one report called it. That's the perfect term for what I experienced. I'm close to retirement now. My hands aren't as steady as they once were, though my eyes are still sharp. Sometimes I think about going back to the Arbuckles one last time, to see if it's still there, watching from behind the trees. But then I remember the feeling of being studied by something intelligent that shouldn't exist, and I decide against it. I don't know what we saw that day. I only know that it was real, that it was aware of us, and that it let us go. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. That's my story. I've never shared it publicly before. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but it feels good to finally put it in writing. If you're ever in the Arbuckles, keep your eyes open, and if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Story 10. I never planned on becoming some kind of Sasquatch whisperer. If you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd be exchanging food with a creature most people think is just a myth, I would have laughed in your face. But living out here about 70 miles into the bush from Prince George changes your perspective on what's real and what's not. It started last fall. I've lived in British Columbia my whole life, mostly around Prince George. 2 years ago, I bought this little cabin out in the wilderness. It's nothing fancy, just a place where I can escape from people and enjoy the quiet. I work as a forestry consultant, which means I spend a lot of time alone in the woods anyway, but having my own place out here feels different. That day in October was crisp, but not too cold yet. I remember because I was wearing just a flannel shirt over my t-shirt, and I'd packed an apple in my backpack as a snack for my hike. I'd been mapping some terrain about a mile from my cabin when I decided to take a break by this small clearing with a fallen log. I sat down, pulled out my apple and took a bite. I heard the snap of a branch somewhere behind me. Now, I'm used to wildlife. We get deer, black bears, all kinds of critters out here, but something felt different about this. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling, nothing. Just that heavy feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I slowly put my half-eaten apple down on the log next to me, stood up, and casually stretched, like I hadn't heard anything. Then I bent down, pretending to tie my boot, and glanced behind me. I didn't see anything at first, just trees and shadows. But then I noticed movement about 30 yards back, partially hidden behind a thick cedar. Something big, much bigger than a bear, and it was standing upright. My heart started hammering in my chest. I'm not someone who scares easily. You can't be living out here. But in that moment, I felt this primal fear wash over me. I straightened up, grabbed my backpack, and started walking away, trying to look calm, but moving at a good clip. I didn't run. Something told me running would be bad. When I'd gone about 50 yards, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned to look back. The apple was gone. In its place was a smooth, colorful rock, and a stick that looked like it had been deliberately cleaned. The rock caught my eye immediately. It was this beautiful mix of deep reds and browns, polished smooth like it had been handled for years. The stick was about 8 inches long, stripped of bark, and rubbed clean. I stood there, frozen. Whatever had left these items must have moved incredibly fast and silently to place them there in the short time I'd walked away. There was absolutely no way a human could have done it without me hearing them. I approached cautiously and picked up the items. The rock felt warm, like it had been held in a hand for a long time. The stick had these small, deliberate marks on it that didn't look like natural wear. I didn't know what to do, so I left them there and hurried back to my cabin, locking the door behind me. I spent that night with my rifle across my lap, listening to every creak and groan of the forest. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it or exaggerated things in my mind. But when I worked up the courage to go back to that log, the rock and stick were still there. I took them home and put them on my windowsill. After that first incident, I became more aware of strange occurrences around my property. There were footprints sometimes, massive ones over 16 inches long, that would appear and disappear in odd places. I'd hear heavy breathing outside my window at night. Once, I swear, I saw a dark shape moving between the trees at dusk, too tall and broad to be human. I didn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? But I started bringing apples with me whenever I went hiking. I'd take a bite, leave it somewhere visible and walk away. Not every time, but often enough, I'd return to find the apple gone and something left in its place. Interesting rocks, clean sticks, once even a perfect bird feather that had been carefully straightened. This went on for months, and gradually the fear began to fade. Whatever was out there could have hurt me many times over, but hadn't. Instead, it seemed curious, maybe even friendly in its own way. Then came the incident closer to town, about 18.6 miles from Prince George. I sometimes take day trips to check on properties for clients, and I was out at this little undeveloped parcel that's surrounded by forest. I'd brought a sandwich, ham and cheese on sourdough, I remember specifically, and as had become my habit, I took a few bites and left it on a stump while I walked the perimeter of the property. When I came back about 20 minutes later, the sandwich was gone. In its place was a perfect pine cone. Now, this might not sound strange, except there wasn't a single fir tree anywhere near that property. The closest ones were at least half a mile away. Someone, something, had carried that pine cone specifically to trade for my sandwich. The pine cone wasn't just any pine cone either. It was symmetrical, every scale intact, like it had been handled with extreme care. I still have it on my desk at home. By September 2007, I was convinced I was interacting with Sasquatches. I know how that sounds. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I'd think I was crazy or making it up. But the evidence kept piling up. The consistent trading behavior, the footprints, the occasional glimpses of something large moving through the trees. One day in early September, I was at my usual spot near the cabin. It was unseasonably warm, and I'd been working all morning marking trees for a sustainable harvesting project. I sat down on my favorite log, ate half an energy bar, and left the rest as I always did. I walked down to the creek about 100 yards away to refill my water bottle. I took my time, enjoying the sunshine filtering through the trees and the sound of the water. When I returned to the log maybe 15 minutes later, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting where my half-eaten energy bar had been was the largest mushroom I've ever seen in my life. It must have been 10 inches across, a perfect specimen of what I later identified as a king bolete mushroom. These are edible and quite delicious. But what struck me wasn't just its size. It was pristine, carefully harvested with the stem intact, gently placed exactly where my food had been. This wasn't just a trade anymore. This was a gift. These mushrooms are prized for cooking, and this one was perfect. No insect damage, no dirt, not a bruise on it. Something had selected this specifically, handled it with care, and brought it to me. I felt this weird lump in my throat, a kind of emotion I can't really explain. After all these months of wordless exchanges, it felt like a friendship offering, like whatever was out there had decided I was okay. I took the mushroom home and made it into soup that night. Maybe that sounds crazy or dangerous, but something told me it was safe. It was the best mushroom soup I've ever had. My experiences aren't unique either. My friend Colin Stone, who lives east of Prince George, has had his own encounters. He called me one evening last summer, his voice shaking. He'd been sitting on his porch near his pond when he heard what he described as some kind of Indian language coming from the trees nearby. According to Colin, it started as low murmuring, almost like two people having a conversation. But then it erupted into what sounded like arguing, yelling and screaming in this language he couldn't identify. It got so intense that his dogs, two big German shepherds that aren't afraid of anything, bolted for the house and hid under the porch, whining. Colin said the fight went on for almost 10 minutes. There was crashing in the underbrush, what sounded like branches breaking, and these deep, guttural shouts that didn't sound human at all. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. The next morning, Colin went to check out the area. The place was a mess. Brush pulled up, small trees bent over, debris scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had hit that one specific spot. But the weirdest part of Colin's story was about the tennis balls. Earlier that summer, he'd bought a pack of bright green fluorescent tennis balls for his dogs. They kept disappearing. He thought maybe the dogs were losing them in the brush, but it was strange how often it happened. Then one day in August, Colin and his girlfriend decided to walk a trail on his property that they hadn't used in a while. About 300 yards from his house, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. All the missing tennis balls lined up in a perfectly straight line across the path. Every single one of the missing balls arranged with such precision it couldn't possibly have been random or done by an animal. Colin said his girlfriend wanted to leave them there, but he picked them up. The next day they were gone again. This time they never reappeared. These experiences have changed how I see the world. I don't talk about them much. People tend to either think you're lying or that you're crazy. But I know what I've experienced. I know that something intelligent lives in these woods, something that understands the concept of trade and gift-giving, something that can move silently, disappear in an instant, and remembers you from one encounter to the next. Just yesterday I left half an orange on my porch railing before going inside to make dinner. When I came back out an hour later, the orange was gone. In its place was a perfect arrowhead, clearly handmade, smooth and sharp. I have no idea how old it is or where it came from. I don't know what these creatures want or why they've chosen to interact with me this way. All I know is that as long as I keep showing respect, they seem to do the same, and somehow that feels like enough. Story 11. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but it's been eating at me for weeks now, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of what happened. I live in Prince George, British Columbia, with my husband and our two daughters, Emma, 6, and Lily, 5. We moved here about 2 years ago for my husband's forestry job, and we love it. Our house backs up to this beautiful stretch of woods that seems to go on forever. This all started back in early summer when the girls began spending more time playing outside. Our property is pretty secluded, with about an acre of cleared land before the tree line starts. I've always felt comfortable letting them play in our yard, though I've been strict about them not wandering into the woods alone. At least I thought I was being strict. I first noticed something odd about 3 months ago. The girls would come back from playing outside with these little handmade gifts, simple braided grass necklaces or stacks of rocks balanced in ways that seemed too intricate for my young kids. When I asked who made them, they'd just giggle and say, "Our friend." I assumed they meant one of each other, or maybe they'd created an imaginary friend together. That happens with kids, right? Then about 2 months ago, I overheard them talking in their bedroom after I'd put them to bed. They were whispering about someone named Kiki. At least that's what it sounded like they were calling it. I heard Emma say, "Do you think Kiki will come play tomorrow?" And Lily responded, "Only if her mama lets her." I thought maybe they'd made up an elaborate imaginary friend together, which seemed sweet. The real alarm bells didn't start ringing until about 6 weeks ago. I was folding laundry on the porch, keeping an eye on the girls as they played on the swing set. I noticed they kept running to the edge of the woods, waving and giggling, then running back to the swing set. This went on for nearly 20 minutes. When I called them in for lunch, they seemed disappointed. 5 more minutes, Mom. Please, Kiki just got here, Emma pleaded. I looked toward the woods, but didn't see anyone. Who's Kiki? I finally asked directly. The girls exchanged this look I'll never forget, like they'd been caught in some secret. Then Lily blurted out, She's our friend from the forest. Emma quickly added, She's shy. She doesn't like grown-ups. I assumed they were talking about an imaginary friend, so I played along. Well, tell Kiki she can come back after lunch, I said with a smile. The girls ran to the edge of the woods, waved goodbye to whatever they thought they saw, and came in for lunch. Over the next couple weeks, I started noticing other strange things. The girls' clothes would sometimes have odd dark hairs stuck to them, much coarser and longer than human hair, almost like animal fur, but not quite like any pet I'd seen. And they'd sometimes come back with tiny scratches on their arms or legs that they couldn't explain. Nothing serious, just the kind of marks kids get from playing outside. But something about the pattern of them seemed deliberate, like tiny finger marks. Then there were the berries. My girls started bringing home handfuls of wild berries I'd never seen them gather before. When I asked where they learned which ones were safe to eat, Lily said very matter-of-factly, Kiki showed us. Her mama knows all the good ones. That's when I started getting concerned. Were they actually talking to someone in the woods? Was some stranger interacting with my children? I decided to be more vigilant. About 4 weeks ago, I was watching from the kitchen window as the girls played. They suddenly dropped their toys and ran toward the woods, jumping up and down excitedly. I hurried outside, but by the time I got there, they were just standing at the tree line looking disappointed. "What are you two doing?" I asked. "Kiki had to go," Emma said, clearly upset. "Her mama called her back when you came out." I knelt down to their level. "Girls, I need you to tell me the truth. Is Kiki a real person? Is someone coming out of the woods to play with you?" They both nodded enthusiastically. Lily said, "She's real, but she's not like us, Mommy. She's all furry." Emma added, "Like a monkey, but bigger. And she walks like us. She's just a kid like us, but she's all covered with brown hair." My blood ran cold. I thought they were describing some person dressed up, maybe some weirdo trying to lure my children. I immediately banned them from playing near the woods. For the next few days, I kept them close to the house, watching them constantly. They were clearly upset about not seeing their friend, but my priority was their safety. After about a week of this, I could tell they were getting restless. They kept asking when they could play with Kiki again. I started wondering if I'd overreacted to their imagination. Maybe I needed to see what they were really talking about. So one afternoon, I sat them down and asked them to tell me everything about Kiki. What followed was the most detailed, consistent description I've ever heard from children their age. According to my girls, Kiki was a child like them but different. She was completely covered in brown hair, with long arms and big hands. She had dark skin underneath the hair, which they could see on her face. She never spoke words but would make squealing sounds when she was happy and laugh in a way that sounded funny but nice. Emma insisted Kiki was a girl because she plays like a girl, whatever that means. The most unsettling part was when they mentioned Kiki's mama. Apparently, this larger version of Kiki would sometimes stand back among the trees and watch them play. The girls weren't scared of her because she just makes sure Kiki is okay. They described games they played, simple things like hide and seek or stacking rocks or following each other around trees. They said Kiki understood them when they spoke, following instructions in their games, even though she never said words back. I was completely freaked out by this point. Either my daughters had created the most elaborate shared delusion I'd ever heard of, or I couldn't even let myself consider the alternative. I decided I needed to see for myself. I told the girls that if Kiki was real, I wanted to meet her. They seemed concerned about this idea. "She's really shy, Mommy," Emma explained. "Every time grown-ups come, she runs away." "Next time you see her, come get me right away," I instructed them. Don't shout or make a big deal. Just come get me quietly." They reluctantly agreed. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, it happened. The girls had been playing in the yard while I worked on my laptop on the porch. Emma suddenly appeared at my side, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom," she whispered, "Kiki's here, but you have to be super quiet." My heart started pounding. Part of me expected to find nothing, maybe a deer or raccoon the girls had misidentified. I set my laptop aside and followed Emma to where Lily was standing at the edge of the woods, waving at something in the trees. "Where is she?" I whispered to Emma. "There." She pointed about 20 feet into the woods, behind that big tree with the broken branch. I squinted, scanning the area, seeing nothing at first. Then something moved. I nearly gasped as I saw what looked like a small, hair-covered figure peer around the tree. It wasn't a bear cub or any animal I recognized. It stood on 2 legs, its proportions all wrong for a typical animal, but not quite human either. It had a face that was... I don't know how to describe it. Not human, but expressive. Curious eyes. It was exactly as the girls had described, completely covered in brown hair, with longer arms than a human child would have. Before I could process what I was seeing, movement further back in the woods caught my eye. That's when I saw it, Kiki's mama. Standing maybe 40 feet back among the trees was a much larger version of the same creature. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, massive shoulders, completely covered in the same brown hair. It was standing perfectly still, watching us, watching the children. I've never felt such primal fear in my life. Every instinct in my body screamed danger, even though neither creature was making any threatening moves. The larger one seemed to be keeping its distance deliberately. I grabbed both my daughter's hands and backed away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. "Girls," I whispered, "we need to go inside right now." "But Mommy, we just started playing," Lily protested. "Now," I hissed, not taking my eyes off the creatures in the woods. As we backed away, the smaller one, Kiki, took a step forward, making a sound that seemed almost like disappointment. The larger one immediately made a low, grunting sound, and Kiki stopped moving. We retreated to the house, and I locked the door behind us, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The girls were upset with me for interrupting their playtime. They didn't understand my fear at all. "Kiki wouldn't hurt us, Mommy," Emma insisted. "She's our friend." "And her mama just watches," Lily added. "She never comes close." I called my husband at work, trying to explain what I'd seen without sounding completely insane. He came home early, and we searched the woods together, finding nothing but some unusual tracks that he said were probably just from a deer or bear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my mind. I've lived in rural areas most of my life. I know the wildlife around here. What I saw wasn't a bear, wasn't a deer, wasn't any animal I recognized. And it certainly wasn't a person in a costume. The movements were too natural, too fluid. The next morning I laid down strict rules. The girls were not allowed near the woods without one of us present. They were heartbroken, crying about how they'd never get to play with Kiki again. A few days later, a man named Leo Keltzer contacted us. Apparently, he'd been conducting research in the area and had heard rumors about Sasquatch sightings. Someone in town, I still don't know who, had mentioned that our family might have information. Under normal circumstances, I would have dismissed him immediately. I've never believed in cryptids or monsters or whatever you want to call them. But after what I'd seen, we agreed to let him interview us. The girls were thrilled to talk about their friend, describing in vivid detail the games they played and how Kiki looked and behaved. Seltzer recorded everything, asking gentle questions without leading them. When he showed them pictures of various animals to identify what they'd seen, they immediately pointed to images of juvenile Sasquatch. It's been just over 2 weeks since Keltzer's visit. The girls still ask daily if they can go play with Kiki. I've caught them sneaking to the edge of the yard a few times, waving into the woods. Sometimes I swear I can feel eyes watching us from the tree line, especially in the evenings. Last night we found a small arrangement of berries and pretty stones on our back porch steps. The girls were ecstatic, claiming it was a gift from Kiki. I disposed of the berries but let them keep the stones. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to move, to get as far away from these woods as possible. But another part wonders if we're in any real danger. The creatures, if that's what they are, have had countless opportunities to harm my daughters and never have. In fact, according to my girls, Kiki has been gentle and playful. My husband thinks we should stay put but remain cautious. He's installed security cameras facing the woods and motion sensor lights along the tree line. The girls are still forbidden from entering the woods alone, which they protest daily. I've tried researching similar encounters, but find mostly ridiculous hoaxes or clearly fabricated stories online. Nothing like what we experienced, nothing that explains the intelligence my girls described or the seemingly deliberate social interaction. I'm writing this because I don't know who else to tell. I can't sleep. Every noise from the woods makes me jump. What if they try to lure my children deeper into the forest? What if the seemingly peaceful interaction is just a prelude to something more sinister? Or what if they're just what my daughters say they are? A child of another species who wanted playmates and her protective mother watching from a distance? Whatever the truth is, I know what I saw. And every morning when I look out the kitchen window, I can't shake the feeling that something out there in the woods is looking back. Story 12. I've been debating for months whether to share this. Even as I type this, my hands are trembling. I'm a dentist in Vancouver, have been for almost 20 years now. I've always considered myself a rational person. I deal in facts, in what I can see and touch. What happened last summer in the Rockies has completely shaken that foundation. My wife Sarah, our 12-year-old daughter Emma and I were on our annual camping trip. We've been going to the same spot in the Canadian Rockies for years. It's remote enough to feel like we're truly getting away, but not so far off the grid that it feels unsafe. At least, that's what I used to think. We had set up our campsite near a small creek, about 2 miles from the nearest marked trail. The first 2 days were perfect. Hiking during the day, campfire stories at night, the whole family bonding experience. Emma was at that age where she was starting to pull away a bit, always on her phone when we're at home. But out there with no reception, she was our little girl again. The third night is when everything changed. I woke to Emma shaking me frantically around 2 a.m. "Dad! Dad! Someone's stealing our food!" she whispered urgently. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. I jumped up immediately, grabbing the flashlight we keep by our sleeping bags. Sarah stirred, but I told her to stay put with Emma. The temperature had dropped considerably. I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. Our cooler was open, and several cans of food were missing from our supply bag that we'd hung in a tree to keep away from bears. That's when I saw him. A small figure darting between the trees at the edge of our campsite. At first glance, I thought it was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old. But something was off. He was barely clothed, just some ragged shorts, his body dirty and his hair wild and matted. He moved with an odd, hunched-over gait that seemed unnatural. In his arms was a pile of our canned goods. "Hey!" I shouted without thinking. "Stop right there!" The boy turned for just a second, and I caught a glimpse of his face in the flashlight beam. His eyes reflected the light like an animal's would. There was something feral in his expression that sent chills through me. Then he was gone, slipping into the darkness between the trees. I don't know what possessed me to follow him. Parental instinct, maybe. Seeing a child alone in the wilderness at night triggered something protective in me, despite the strange circumstances. I told Emma to go back to the tent with her mother and grabbed a second flashlight. "Arthur, don't! Sarah called after me, but I was already jogging toward the tree line, following the sound of rustling underbrush. The forest was dense and dark, the beam of my flashlight seeming pathetically inadequate against the wall of blackness. I stumbled over roots and rocks, trying to keep pace with the sounds ahead of me. The boy was fast, but he was making no effort to be quiet. I could hear cans clanking together as he ran. After about 5 minutes of pursuit, I noticed the forest was thinning out. Ahead, there seemed to be some kind of clearing. The footfalls I was following had slowed, and I could hear something else now, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but definitely wasn't human. I slowed my pace, suddenly aware of how foolish I'd been. I was alone in the wilderness, chasing something I didn't understand. Every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward. I switched off my flashlight, allowing my eyes to adjust to the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. At the edge of the clearing, I crouched behind a fallen log and peered over it. What I saw next will stay with me until the day I die. The boy stood in the center of the small clearing, the stolen cans arranged in a small pile at his feet. He was making soft, clicking and hooting sounds, his head tilted back slightly, and then something moved at the far edge of the clearing, something massive. At first, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It was a figure, unmistakably bipedal, but enormous, at least 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark, matted hair or fur that moved slightly in the night breeze. Its proportions were human-like but exaggerated. Long arms that hung almost to its knees, broad shoulders, a powerful chest. The moonlight wasn't strong enough for me to make out detailed facial features, but I could see the gleam of eyes set deep under a heavy brow ridge. I bit down hard on my knuckles to keep from making a sound. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain the creatures could hear it. The giant figure approached the boy slowly, making similar clicking and guttural sounds. There was a rhythm to their noises, a pattern that horribly resembled conversation. The boy wasn't afraid. He reached up as the massive creature approached, like a child reaching for a parent. The giant being reached down and gently, so gently it seemed impossible for something so large, took some of the cans from the pile. Then, with its free hand, it lightly touched the boy's head in what looked like an affectionate gesture. They stood like that for a moment, continuing their strange exchange of sounds. Then, as if reaching some agreement, they both turned toward the far side of the clearing. I noticed then that they moved with the same distinctive gait, hunched slightly forward, arms swinging in a particular way. They walked off together into the darkness of the forest, the boy matching the giant stride for stride, though with smaller steps. I remained frozen behind that log for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just witnessed. A bear walking upright. No, impossible. A man in a suit, in the remote wilderness, interacting with a feral child. It made no sense. When I finally found the courage to move, I realized I was soaked with cold sweat despite the chill air. My legs were numb from crouching so long, and I stumbled several times as I made my way back to camp, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. Sarah was standing at the edge of our campsite looking terrified. "Arthur, where the hell have you been? It's been almost an hour." I couldn't find the words to explain. How do you tell your wife you just saw what appeared to be a Sasquatch and a feral human child having a conversation in the woods? Instead, I told her I'd chased off a young teen who was probably from another campsite playing pranks. I'm not sure she believed me. I was visibly shaken and kept glancing back at the tree line, but she didn't press the issue. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. I insisted on keeping the fire built up higher than usual, and we stayed close together. Emma kept asking questions about the wild boy, as she called him, but I deflected as best I could. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I'd experienced some kind of waking dream or stress hallucination. But then we found the tracks. While packing up our gear, I'd insisted we cut our trip short. Emma called me over to the edge of our campsite. There, pressed into a patch of soft soil, were footprints, a set of small, human-like prints, alongside massive non-human tracks nearly 15 inches long. They led exactly in the direction I'd followed the night before. "Dad," Emma whispered, "what made these?" I took a photo with my phone before hurriedly ushering Emma back to help her mother. The rational part of my brain was failing spectacularly at explaining away what I'd seen. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the interaction I'd witnessed. There had been something undeniably tender about it. The way the giant being had touched the boy's head, the way they communicated. It wasn't the behavior of a monster or a mindless animal. After returning to Vancouver, I tried to put the experience behind me. I went back to my dental practice, smiled at patients, and pretended everything was normal. But at night, I found myself researching similar sightings in the area, looking into local law, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That's when I found the news articles about the plane crash. In 1989, a private aircraft carrying French tourists went down in the Rockies. According to the reports, all passengers were killed, including a woman named Madeleine Disseur. But her infant son, Marcel, was never recovered despite extensive searches. The case was eventually closed, the child presumed dead from exposure. The timing fit. If Marcel Disseur had somehow survived, he would be about the same age as the wild boy I saw. But how could an infant survive in the wilderness? Unless... I found myself on forums dedicated to Sasquatch sightings. Most of it seemed like nonsense, but a few accounts from the region caught my attention. Reports from hikers, rangers, even RCMP officers who claimed to have seen a large, hair-covered bipedal creature in the company of what they described as a naked wild child. The sightings went back several years, and many described the same guttural language exchange I had witnessed. 2 weeks after our camping trip, I couldn't take it anymore. I contacted a local zoologist, Dr. Tom Warrior, who I'd read had taken an interest in these sightings. I was nervous about being ridiculed, but Dr. Warrior listened to my account without judgment. He told me mine was the 34th credible report he'd received of the pair. "What you've described," he said after I finished my account, "suggests not a monster, but an intelligent being capable of compassion and nurturing behavior. If this is indeed the Disseur child, it means this creature found an abandoned human infant and instead of harming it, raised it as its own." His words gave me chills, not from fear this time, but from the implication. What I'd witnessed wasn't just a cryptozoological curiosity. It was a profound relationship between two beings that defied our understanding of the natural world. Dr. Warrior asked if I would be willing to lead a small research team back to the location, but I declined. Something about the encounter felt private, sacred even. I couldn't shake the feeling that by following them, I had intruded on something intimate and special. The way they moved together, communicated with each other, there was a bond there that I couldn't bring myself to disrupt further. 5 months have passed since that night. I've told only a handful of people about what I saw, usually meeting with disbelief or concerns about my mental health. Sarah knows something happened out there that frightened me deeply, but I haven't shared the full truth with her either. Some experiences are too profound, too reality-altering to put into words for those who weren't there. I still practice dentistry. I still live my normal life. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet moments before sleep, my mind drifts back to that clearing in the moonlight. I see the massive, gentle hand resting on the wild boy's head. I hear their strange, rhythmic communication. And I wonder about Marcel Disseur, if that's indeed who the boy is, and the extraordinary being that saved him from certain death and raised him as its own. What keeps me awake isn't fear anymore. It's the humbling realization that there are depths to this world and to the capacity for connection between living things that we haven't begun to understand. The wilderness holds secrets that defy our neat categorizations and challenge our place in the natural order. I don't know if I'll ever go back to the Rockies. Part of me wants desperately, to confirm what I saw wasn't a delusion. But another part knows with absolute certainty that what I witnessed was real. A relationship between two beings from different worlds who found family in each other against all odds, and maybe that's enough. Story 13. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It's been over 25 years since it happened, but I still think about it almost daily. I'm not some conspiracy theorist or even really into cryptid stuff. I just know what I experienced, and I can't explain it. Back in the mid-90s, I was working as a wildlife photographer, mostly freelance work for outdoor magazines and conservation groups. I had landed a gig documenting the Six Rivers wilderness areas in Northern California for a conservation project. The area is incredibly remote. Dense forests, rugged terrain, caves, and some of the most untouched wilderness in the lower 48. The organization I was working with insisted I take a local guide who knew the area intimately. That's how I met Henry Moon, a Dakota man in his late 60s who had been living in the area for decades. Henry wasn't talkative at first, just the practical essentials about trails, water sources, and wildlife. He carried himself with this quiet confidence that only comes from truly knowing the land. We were about 3 days into what was planned as a 2-week excursion. I had been taking photos of some old-growth redwoods when Henry called me over to a small clearing. "I'm going to show you something your fancy camping stores don't teach," he said. The first hint of a smile I'd seen from him. Henry took out a small folding shovel and began digging a hole about 16 inches deep and 12 inches across. Next to it, he dug a smaller angled tunnel connecting to the bottom of the main hole. He grabbed some dry twigs, made a small teepee in the main hole, and then carefully lit it. What happened next fascinated me. The fire burned hot and fast, but there was almost no smoke. The design created a natural draft through the side tunnel that fed oxygen to the fire below ground level. "Dakota fire hole," Henry explained. "My people have used it for generations. Burns hotter, uses less wood, and most importantly," he pointed upward, "no smoke signature." I asked why the lack of smoke was so important. "When you're being hunted, you don't want to announce your location," he said matter-of-factly. "Army scouts, enemy tribes, they all look for smoke." I remember thinking this was fascinating, but just historical knowledge, a clever survival technique from a different era. I was wrong. That evening, as we ate dinner around our small underground fire, I asked Henry about local legends. I'd heard rumors about Sasquatch sightings in these parts and figured it might make for an interesting side story to my conservation piece. Henry went quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, more serious, almost reverent. "The people of the forest aren't legends," he said, using a term I hadn't heard before. "They're as real as you and me." I remember forcing myself not to roll my eyes. I'd heard plenty of Bigfoot stories before, usually involving some drunk guys in the woods who saw a bear. "Do they use fire?" I asked, genuinely curious about what he'd say. Henry looked at me like I'd finally asked something worth answering. "Who do you think taught us the Dakota fire?" he said. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. "The old ones mastered fire long before humans walked these lands," he continued. "They build their fires below ground, like this one. When they're done, they fill the holes with dirt and cover them with leaves. You'd never know they were there." I asked where they lived, still thinking this was just a good campfire story. "Deep," Henry said, pointing to the mountains beyond us, "in lava tubes and caves where water drips from the ceiling. Places no white man has mapped, places your GPS can't find." He went on to explain that the people of the forest were masters of leaving no trace. That's why no one finds them. The Sasquatch never leaves things laying around. That is white man's sign, not the red man's. I must have looked skeptical because Henry shook his head. "Tomorrow I'll show you," he said, and wouldn't elaborate further. That night, I slept restlessly. The forest seemed different somehow, like Henry's stories had changed how I perceived the darkness between the trees. Every crack of a branch made me tense up. Early the next morning, Henry woke me before dawn. "Today we go deeper," he said. "Bring only what you need." We hiked for hours, moving away from the established trails into increasingly dense forest. The terrain got rougher, with rock formations and fallen trees creating natural barriers. Henry moved through it all effortlessly, while I struggled to keep up. Around midday, we reached what looked like an ordinary hillside covered in ferns and moss. Henry stopped and surveyed the area carefully before approaching a specific spot. He knelt down and brushed away some fallen leaves, revealing bare soil that looked slightly different from the surrounding ground. "Watch," he said, digging gently with his hands. About 6 inches down, he exposed a layer of ash and charcoal in a perfect circle. My heart started racing. "Someone's campsite?" I asked, already knowing that made no sense this far from any trail. Henry shook his head. "Look around. No trampled vegetation, no food scraps, no human garbage." He pointed to the fire remnants. "This is only a day or two old. Perfect Dakota fire hole, filled in and covered." "Couldn't that just be another hiker who knows the technique?" I asked, trying to find a rational explanation. "In this spot, miles from any trail, with no other signs?" Henry stood up. "You think like a white man, always needing to explain away what doesn't fit your world." I took some photos of the site, though I wasn't sure what they would show, just some ash and dirt. As I was putting my camera away, Henry suddenly froze. He raised his hand for silence and tilted his head, listening. I didn't hear anything at first. Then I caught it, a faint, rhythmic sound, like something heavy walking with deliberate steps. It was far off, but in the quiet of the forest, it carried. "We should go," Henry whispered, all his earlier confidence replaced with caution. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "We're being watched," he replied. "Have been since yesterday." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. "By what?" Henry just gave me a look that said I already knew the answer. We began making our way back, but not the way we came. Henry chose a different route, one that took us across several streams. I realized he was trying to break our trail. About an hour into our return journey, we heard it again. The rhythmic footfalls, but closer now. Henry picked up our pace without a word. The forest seemed to close in around us, shadows deepening, though it was only mid-afternoon. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a long, low vocalization that wasn't quite a howl and wasn't quite human. It resonated through the trees and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Don't run," Henry warned. "Just keep moving steady." My hands were shaking so badly I had to strap my camera to my backpack. Every instinct told me to sprint, but I trusted Henry and maintained our pace. The sound came again, this time answered by another call from a different direction. They were communicating, they were coordinating. "Henry," I whispered, "are they hunting us?" "Not hunting," he replied. "Escorting. We're in their territory. They're making sure we leave." As if to confirm his words, a massive rock crashed through the branches about 50 feet to our right. Not close enough to hit us, but close enough to send a message. "Don't look for them," Henry cautioned. "They don't want to be seen." Of course, that made me desperately want to scan the forest, but I kept my eyes forward and focused on following Henry. The sounds continued, footsteps paralleling our course, occasional calls back and forth, and twice more, rocks or heavy branches crashing down nearby. As the day waned, Henry seemed to know exactly where we were, despite the indirect route. Just before dusk, we reached a small creek I recognized from our journey in. We were getting close to our original campsite. "We'll stay here tonight," Henry said, selecting a spot near the water. "In the open, where they can see us." "Shouldn't we keep going? Get back to the trail?" I asked, not wanting to spend another night out there. "No, that would show fear. We respect their territory, they respect us. We camp, we leave in the morning." Henry proceeded to dig another Dakota fire hole, but this time he was meticulous about every detail. The hole was precisely dug, the air tunnel at exactly the right angle. He gathered specific types of wood that he said would burn with minimal smoke. "You try," he said, stepping back after demonstrating. My hands were still shaking, but I tried to mimic what he'd done. My first attempt failed. The fire smoldered and produced smoke. My second and third attempts weren't much better. "You're not listening to the fire," Henry said. "It needs to breathe. The hole must draw air like lungs." On my fourth attempt, with Henry adjusting the air tunnel slightly, it worked. The fire caught and burned hot, with virtually no smoke rising above the rim of the hole. It was like magic, a dancing flame that disappeared from view just a foot above ground level. "They're watching," Henry said quietly, nodding toward the darkening forest. "They're always watching." That night was the longest of my life. We ate a cold dinner. Henry didn't want to cook and create food smells. The sounds in the forest continued, not always footsteps, but movement, calls, and once what sounded like wood knocking against wood. "They use tools," Henry said, noticing my reaction to the knocking. "Not just sticks and stones. They work wood, weave plants." "How do you know all this?" I finally asked. Henry was silent for a long moment. "My grandfather took me into these woods when I was a boy. We left offerings at special places. Sometimes there would be exchanges." "Exchanges? Like trades?" "Like respect," he corrected. "We would leave tobacco, tools. Later we might find berries, unusual stones, once a carved piece of antler." He looked at me directly. "I have lived near these forests for 40 years. I have seen things that would make your scientist friends rethink everything they claim to know." I wanted to ask more, but a series of calls erupted from the forest. At least 3 distinct vocalizations from different directions. They were like nothing I'd ever heard. Deep, resonant, with complex modulations that seemed impossible to come from an animal throat. "They're talking about us," Henry said calmly. "What are they saying?" I asked, half joking to mask my fear. "They're deciding if we're a threat." He wasn't joking at all. I barely slept that night. Every sound jolted me awake. The Dakota fire burned low in its hole, occasionally needing new fuel. Each time I added wood, I felt exposed, certain that eyes were tracking my every move. Near dawn, I dozed off from exhaustion. I woke to Henry gently shaking my shoulder. "It's time to go," he said. "But first, look." About 20 feet from our campsite at the edge of the clearing was a perfect Dakota fire hole, freshly dug, with the ashes still warm. Next to it lay an arrangement of berries on a large maple leaf. "An offering," Henry explained. "They're acknowledging that you learned their fire." I stared at the site, unable to process what I was seeing. When did this happen? How did I not hear them? "They move like shadows when they choose to," Henry said. "Even I didn't hear them." I approached the fire hole cautiously. It was flawless, better than Henry's demonstration, with an air tunnel carved at a precise angle. The ashes showed that a hot, efficient fire had burned there recently. As I knelt to examine it closer, I noticed something else, a clear handprint pressed into the soft earth beside the hole. It was massive, easily twice the size of my hand, with 5 distinct fingers and a thumb. The impression was deep and perfect, not smudged or partial like a casual print would be. It had been deliberately left for us to find. I reached for my camera with trembling hands, but Henry placed his hand on my arm. "No photographs," he said firmly. "This is a message for us, not for your magazines." I wanted to argue, to insist that this was evidence people needed to see, but something in Henry's expression stopped me. There was wisdom there and warning. We filled in both fire holes carefully, erasing all trace of our presence. Henry took the berries and scattered them back into the forest as we left, explaining it was proper to return the offering to the land. As we hiked out that day, the forest was utterly silent. No mysterious footfalls, no calls, nothing but natural woodland sounds. It was as if whatever had been escorting us had decided we were no longer in their territory, or perhaps no longer of interest. We completed my photography assignment over the next week, but we never returned to that deep part of the forest. Henry refused to discuss what had happened except to say, "The people of the forest have been here long before us. They'll be here long after. They don't need your world knowing their secrets." When I got home, I developed the few photos I had taken near the first firehole we'd found. They showed nothing conclusive, just disturbed soil that could have been anything. The conservation organization published my other photos with a nice article about preserving the wilderness, but I never included any mention of what happened that day. I've gone back and forth over the years about what I experienced. Sometimes I almost convinced myself it was just an elaborate prank, or that Henry had some agenda in making me believe in Sasquatch. But then I remember the perfect Dakota firehole that appeared while I slept, the handprint that could not have been human, and those vocalizations that still echo in my dreams. I know what I experienced. I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere in those remote forests, the people of the forest are still there, watching, using their smokeless fires, and staying hidden from a world that wouldn't understand them. Story 14. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. For over 20 years, I've kept it to myself because I know exactly how it sounds. But I need to get this off my chest once and for all. Back in 2001, I was working as a land surveyor in Apache County, Arizona. I was 32 at the time and had been in the business for almost a decade. The job was pretty straightforward, mapping out property boundaries for a new development project in the northern part of the county, about 30 miles from the nearest proper town. It was remote work, which I preferred. Just me, my equipment, and miles of beautiful, untouched Arizona wilderness. That particular day in late October started like any other. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my cheap motel room, grabbed my gear, and drove my beat-up Ford Ranger to the site. The weather was perfect, crisp and cool, around 55 degrees when I arrived just after sunrise. I remember the sky was this incredible deep blue you only see in the high desert, not a cloud in sight. I had been working the same area for nearly 2 weeks and had about 3 more days of work to complete the job. The terrain was mostly pinyon juniper woodland with some rocky outcroppings and shallow ravines. Beautiful country, but tough to survey, with all the elevation changes and dense vegetation in spots. I parked my truck at the access road and hiked in about 2 miles to where I'd left off the day before. I was carrying my transit equipment, GPS unit, marking flags, my backpack with water and lunch, and a metal lunch pail my dad had given me years before. Kind of old school, I know, but it was sentimental. Plus, it kept my sandwich from getting crushed. By mid-morning, I had made good progress. I was working near a small ridge with a rocky overhang where I'd set up my transit to take measurements across a small valley. The sun was getting higher, and I was totally focused on my work, checking readings, marking coordinates, making notes in my field book, normal stuff. That's when I first heard the coyotes. Now, hearing coyotes isn't unusual in northern Arizona. You hear them all the time, especially at dawn and dusk. But this was different. It was around 11 a.m., and they were making this excited yapping sound that was much louder and more frenzied than normal. It wasn't their typical howling. It was more like they were worked up about something. Really worked up. At first, I tried to ignore it and focus on my measurements, but the sounds kept getting louder. It seemed like they were just on the other side of the ridge where I'd set up my equipment. My curiosity got the better of me. I secured my transit and decided to check it out, thinking maybe they'd cornered a deer or something. I climbed up toward my equipment, which I'd left on a flat spot under a rocky overhang. The yapping got louder with every step. I remember thinking it sounded like there were at least 5 or 6 coyotes, which is unusual since they typically hunt in smaller groups during the day. As I approached the overhang, I slowed down and moved more cautiously. Something felt off. The hair on my arms was standing up, and I had this weird sensation in my gut that I wasn't alone. And I don't mean just the coyotes. I can't explain it, but I felt like I was being watched by something bigger. I crouched down and moved toward a large juniper tree about 30 feet from the overhang. That's when I saw them. 4 coyotes dancing around excitedly, looking up at something under the rock ledge where my transit was set up. They weren't running away or acting scared. If anything, they seemed expectant, like dogs waiting for a treat. And then I saw what they were looking at. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Standing there, partially in the shadow of the overhang, was something I can only describe as a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, believe me. If someone had told me this story, I would have thought they were full of shit or hallucinating. But I was stone-cold sober, wide awake, and saw it as clearly as I'm seeing this keyboard now. It was tall, easily 7 feet, maybe more. Not massive like you see in movies, but solid, built like a well-conditioned athlete. The proportions were human-like, but everything was just bigger. Longer arms, broader shoulders. It was completely covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but hair. This reddish-black color that reminded me of a dark chestnut horse. The hair wasn't shaggy like you see in those blurry photos, but more like a short, dense coat that covered everything. What struck me was how wild it looked. The hair had all kinds of stuff caught in it, cockleburs stuck to its arms, pine needles, and what looked like pine sap or gum glinting in the sunlight where it had brushed against trees, like it had been living rough in the woods for a long time. Its face is what I remember most clearly. It had this prominent brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, making them look deeper set than a human's. Its nose was broad and flat, and its jaw was strong but not jutting out like an ape's. It looked more like a very primitive human than a gorilla or chimp. And it was eating. God, I still remember this vividly. It was holding what was clearly a jackrabbit, tearing pieces off, and this is the part that still blows my mind, tossing them to the coyotes. The coyotes would catch the chunks of meat and scarf them down, then look back up expectantly, waiting for more, like this was a routine they'd done before. I was frozen in place, crouched behind that juniper, not daring to move a muscle. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Part of my brain was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hunter in some kind of ghillie suit, but no hunter moves like that, and no hunter shares kills with wild coyotes that act like trained pets. I must have been watching for at least 5 minutes, completely mesmerized. The creature was methodical, tearing the rabbit apart with its hands, not claws, but hands with what looked like thick, strong fingers. It would occasionally take a bite itself, then tear off another piece and toss it to a waiting coyote, and then I screwed up. I had set my metal lunch pail down beside me while I was watching, and when I shifted my weight, it tipped over and hit a rock with a loud clang that echoed across the small valley. Everything froze. The coyotes stopped yapping and turned toward the sound, and the creature, the Bigfoot, slowly turned its head and looked directly at me. I'll never forget that moment. Our eyes met across the distance, and I felt something I can't fully explain. It wasn't fear exactly, though I was definitely scared. It was more like recognition, like 2 intelligent beings acknowledging each other's existence. Its eyes were dark, but alert and undeniably aware. This was no animal operating on instinct. There was someone home behind those eyes. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, we just stared at each other. Then With a deliberate calmness that still amazes me, it dropped what was left of the rabbit, turned, and simply walked away. Not running, not charging, just walking with long, smooth strides into the thicker trees beyond the overhang. The coyotes immediately followed it, trotting after the creature like they were all part of the same pack. Within moments, they had all disappeared into the woods, and the only sound was the wind through the junipers and my own heart pounding in my ears. I stayed frozen for at least another 5 minutes, terrified it might come back. When I finally got the courage to move, I ran to my transit, quickly packed it up with shaking hands, and got the hell out of there. I left half my markers and stakes behind and practically jogged the 2 miles back to my truck. I sat in my truck for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen. I considered calling someone, the police, the Forest Service, my boss. But what would I say? That I saw Bigfoot having lunch with a pack of coyotes? They'd think I was crazy or on drugs. I eventually drove back to my motel and called my supervisor to tell him I got sick and needed to head home. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that site. A colleague finished the job the following week. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those eyes looking at me. I'd jolt awake at night, thinking I heard coyotes outside my window. I looked up everything I could find about Bigfoot sightings in Arizona, which weren't many compared to the Pacific Northwest. Nothing quite matched what I'd seen, especially the interaction with the coyotes. A month later, I finally got up the courage to tell my wife. She didn't laugh or call me crazy, which I'm eternally grateful for. She just asked questions. What exactly did it look like? How did it move? Did it seem aggressive? When I told her about the coyotes, she was as baffled as I was. We agreed not to tell anyone else. Eventually, in 2003, I anonymously submitted a detailed description to a Bigfoot research group, omitting my name and exact location. I just couldn't keep it completely to myself anymore. I needed someone to know what I'd seen, even if they didn't know who I was. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened that day. The scientific part of my brain still struggles with it. There's no way a creature that size could exist in North America without definitive evidence. Yet the surveyor in me, the part trained to observe and measure with precision, knows exactly what I saw. What haunts me most is the relationship with the coyotes. That wasn't random. Those animals were comfortable around this creature. They had a system, a relationship. It makes me wonder how long it had been out there, how many generations of coyotes had learned to follow it for easy meals. It makes me wonder what else we don't know about what lives in our forests. I've never gone back to that specific area of Apache County. I've done other jobs in northern Arizona, but always made excuses when assignments came up too close to that location. I can't bring myself to go back. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, still sharing kills with coyotes and moving silently through the juniper trees. I wonder if it remembers me as clearly as I remember it. I wonder if it tells stories about the day it saw a human watching it from behind a tree. It's been over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it again. But I still look every time I'm in the woods. I still listen for coyotes yapping with that excited tone in the middle of the day. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the wilderness for work, I feel like I'm being watched. And I wonder if our paths have crossed again without me knowing. I know how this all sounds. I know most people reading this will think I'm making it up or that I saw a bear or a man in a costume. That's fine. I've made my peace with that. But I know what I saw that day in Apache County, and somewhere out there, so does it. Story 15. I'm still shaking as I type this. It happened yesterday, and I haven't been able to sleep since. I need to tell someone, and I figured some of you might believe me. Most people I know would just laugh, but what I saw was real. I live in a rural area just outside Seguin, Texas, about 3 miles from Metal Lake. It's usually quiet out here, just farms, scattered houses, and a whole lot of nothing. I've been here almost 4 years now, working remotely as a software developer. The isolation suits me fine. I like being away from the city noise, and the property was cheap. Every morning for the past year, I've been doing these sunrise walks. The doctor said it would help with my insomnia and anxiety. Most days I'd see the usual, maybe a few deer, raccoons, sometimes wild hogs in the distance. Yesterday was different. Yesterday changed everything. I left my house around 5:30 a.m. The air was cool, maybe 58 degrees, with that heavy morning dampness that hangs around before the Texas heat kicks in. I was on my regular route down Loch Lane in Montelope County. It's a dirt road that stretches about 2 miles between properties, mostly surrounded by dense woods and occasional clearings. I know every inch of that road. The sun was just starting to come up, creating that golden pink glow on the horizon. I remember checking my watch. It was exactly 6:07 a.m. I was about a mile from my house, near where Loch Lane crosses an old dried-up creek bed. There's a clearing there that faces east, and the sunrise was directly in my line of sight, almost blinding. That's when I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the rising sun. At first, I thought it was just a group of coyotes. We get them all the time around here, and they're usually not a big deal. But something was off about the way they were moving, organized, almost purposeful. I stopped walking and squinted against the sunlight. There were definitely coyotes. I could make out their shapes clearly. 2 were in front, moving like scouts, but behind them, that's when I saw it. A massive figure walking upright, completely silhouetted by the sun. It was huge, I'd guess at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down past its waist. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Behind this thing were 4 more coyotes, following in formation. My whole body went cold. I couldn't move. They were crossing Loch Lane eastbound, maybe 100 yards ahead of me. I was downwind, thank God, or I'm sure they would have noticed me. The big figure, I don't know what else to call it but a Bigfoot, moved with this weird grace. Not lumbering or awkward like you'd expect from something so large. It walked with purpose, taking these long strides, but completely silent. The coyotes were making these little yipping sounds to each other, but the big thing made no noise at all. I slowly reached for my phone in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even unlock the screen. By the time I got the camera open, they were already disappearing into the tree line on the other side of the road. All I got was a blurry shot of nothing but trees and morning mist. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 20 seconds, but it felt like slow motion. Once they disappeared, I just stood there, frozen, for what must have been several minutes. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud. I've never felt like prey before, but that's exactly what it felt like. When I was sure they were gone, I turned around and walked, then ran, straight back home. I locked all the doors and windows and spent the entire day searching online for any similar sightings in the area. The weird thing is, this isn't even known as Bigfoot country. I've lived in Texas my whole life and never heard reports from around Seguin or Montelope County. I'm not some Bigfoot enthusiast or conspiracy theorist. I never gave it much thought before. But what I saw was real. It wasn't a guy in a suit. The way it moved, the proportions, the complete silence, no human could fake that. What keeps bothering me is the coyotes. They were moving with this thing like they were a team, like they belonged together. 2 in front, the big creature in the middle, and 4 following behind. I've seen plenty of coyotes around here, and they don't behave like that with humans. They scatter, they're skittish. These weren't. After spending hours online yesterday, I found some reports of Bigfoot researchers theorizing that Sasquatch might have relationships with other predators. The theory is that Bigfoot hunts deer and other large game, takes what it wants, and leaves the rest for scavengers like coyotes. It would explain why these animals were following it. They've learned there's a food reward. I'm not 100% certain all of them were coyotes, to be honest. With the blinding sun, some could have been feral dogs. But the ones I could see clearly had that distinctive coyote profile. Pointed ears, bushy tails held low, narrow snouts. The sounds they made were definitely coyote yips and whines. Last night, around 2 a.m., I heard howling outside my property. Not unusual around here, but it sounded different. More organized, almost like they were calling to each other in some pattern. I didn't sleep a wink. Kept my shotgun next to the bed. I know it sounds paranoid, but you didn't see what I saw. This morning, I forced myself to go back to that spot on Loch Lane. I had to know if I could find any evidence. In the daylight, everything looked so normal. It was almost enough to make me doubt myself. Almost. I found tracks crossing the dirt road. Plenty of coyote prints, that was clear. But there were other impressions too, partially obscured because the ground is hard there. Large, elongated depressions that could have been footprints, but not clear enough to be certain. Nothing conclusive you could show to a skeptic, but enough to convince me I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that what I saw was some kind of alpha relationship. The coyotes weren't just following this creature, they were working with it, hunting with it. The ones in front were scouting, the ones behind were, I don't know, cleanup crew. Guards? I've never seen anything like it. I'm not comfortable sharing my exact location or real name. I value my privacy out here, and frankly, I'm afraid of attracting attention. Both from skeptics who'll think I'm crazy, and from thrill-seekers who might disturb whatever's out there. I don't want to be responsible for someone getting hurt trying to find this thing. For now, I'm staying inside as much as possible. I've ordered some trail cameras that should arrive tomorrow. I'll set them up along that stretch of Loch Lane and see if I can catch anything. Part of me hopes I don't. One detail keeps coming back to me. The way this thing moved. It wasn't just walking. It was patrolling. It knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing. This wasn't some random animal wandering through. This thing had purpose, intelligence, the way the coyotes deferred to it. It was the leader, the alpha. I grew up hunting in East Texas with my dad and uncles. I know every animal native to this state. What I saw yesterday wasn't on that list. Since I got home, I've been watching the tree line from my windows. The woods seem different now, knowing what's in there. It's like when you realize there's a spider in your room, but you don't know where. Suddenly, every shadow, every movement catches your attention. I measured the height of a particular pine tree where they crossed, using it as a reference. If my estimates are right, this thing had to be at least 7'5" tall. No human around here comes close to that. The way it held itself too, the shoulders weren't just broad, they were sloped, with what looked like a shorter neck than a human would have. The arms were wrong, too long, hanging down almost to the knees, and the torso seemed massive compared to the lower body. I've never been a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or any of that. I'm still not sure what I believe. All I know is what I saw, and it wasn't anything that's supposed to exist according to science. Last night, I heard something large moving around outside my house, breaking branches. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, listening. It circled the property twice before moving off toward the east. The same direction the group was headed yesterday morning. I didn't look outside. I didn't want to know if it was looking in. I haven't told any neighbors yet. There aren't many out here anyway. Nearest house is about half a mile. But I'm worried about the Taylor family down the road. They have small kids and chickens. If this thing is hunting in the area... What really gets me is how organized it all seemed. Nature isn't supposed to work that way. Different species don't form hunting parties. But that's exactly what this looked like. A coordinated group with a leader and a purpose. The more I think about it, the more I wonder if this thing has been around here all along. There have been times over the past few years when livestock has gone missing, or hunters have found deer carcasses picked unusually clean. Everyone just blamed coyotes or feral hogs. Now I'm not so sure. I've lived alongside nature my whole life. I respect it, but I've never feared it until now. It's like finding out there's a secret predator at the top of the food chain that no one acknowledges. If anyone else in Montelope County has seen anything like this, please let me know. I can't be the only one. Something this big moving around with a pack of coyotes in broad daylight, someone else must have noticed. For now, I've changed my morning routine. No more sunrise walks. I'm staying close to the house, especially around dawn and dusk. I'm keeping the shotgun loaded, though I don't know if it would do much good against something that size. I don't know what's going to happen next. Part of me wants to pack up and move back to the city. Another part is morbidly curious, wants to understand what I saw, needs to know more. I just keep thinking about those coyotes, how they seemed so comfortable around this massive creature, like they'd been working together for years. The sun's starting to go down now. The woods behind my property are getting dark. I keep looking out the window, scanning the tree line. Is it out there right now, watching? Did it follow my scent back here yesterday? Does it know I saw it? I've always considered myself a rational person, but right now, rationality isn't giving me any answers. All I know is what I saw crossing Loch Lane yesterday morning. A giant, upright figure leading a pack of coyotes toward the rising sun. And no matter how many times I play it back in my head, I can't explain it away. If it comes back, I'll try to get evidence. If not, at least I've told someone what happened. I doubt the local sheriff would take this seriously. Man sees Bigfoot with coyote buddies at sunrise isn't exactly a priority call. The howling has started again tonight, closer this time. I'm signing off now to go check the locks again. I'll update if anything else happens, but honestly, I'm hoping it doesn't. I know how this all sounds. If I'd read this a week ago, I'd think the writer was crazy or on something. All I can say is that I know what I saw, and now I can't unsee it.